Hi guys, tonight we're travelling back roughly 60,000 years, far beyond cities, farms, roads and written memory, into a world where human history survives mostly in stone, bone, ash, ancient DNA, and the quiet traces people left behind. You arrive beneath a dark prehistoric sky. A small fire glows beside a rocky shelter, sending thin smoke into the cool air. Beyond its light, grasses move softly in the wind. Somewhere in the darkness, an animal calls, then everything becomes quiet again. There are no streetlights beyond the horizon, no engines, no distant aircraft, no glowing screens waiting to inform you that you should probably have gone to sleep 40 minutes ago. Only firelight, stars, and people. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, and tell me in the comments where you're listening from tonight, and what time it is where you are. Now dim the lights, and allow the fire in front of you to become a little clearer. You are standing in the late Pleistocene, approximately 60,000 years before the present. The world is colder than the one you know, although conditions vary enormously from region to region. Great quantities of water are periodically locked within expanding ice sheets farther north. Landscapes shift as climates fluctuate, and environments that seem permanent to you can change dramatically over generations. Yet here, where you have arrived, there is no sense that you're witnessing some primitive beginning. People have already been people for a very long time. Homo sapiens emerged in Africa hundreds of thousands of years before this night. By around 60,000 years ago, populations of our species were living across diverse African environments, while human groups were also beginning or continuing movements into southwestern Asia, and eventually much farther across Eurasia. You approach the shelter slowly. The first thing you notice is its size. There are perhaps a few dozen people nearby, although group size would have changed with season, resources, relationships, and movement. Nobody has built a permanent village. There are no neat rows of houses waiting beyond the fire. Instead, the shelter uses what the landscape already provides. A shallow overhang protects part of the sleeping area. Branches and hides may offer additional protection. The ground has been chosen carefully rather than randomly. It is reasonably dry, close enough to useful resources, and positioned where smoke can escape. The fire crackles. You smell wood smoke immediately. Underneath it comes something richer, perhaps roasted meat or plant food warming near the embers. There's also the unmistakable smell of hides, earth, bodies, crushed vegetation, and ash. Prehistoric life, you quickly discover, does not come with scented candles. You move closer. A person crouches near the flames, adjusting a piece of wood. Another sits farther back working with stone. Tap, pause, tap. A fragment breaks away. The sound is surprisingly delicate. Stone tools are already ancient technology by this period. Humans and earlier hominins had been making them for immense stretches of time. By 60,000 years ago, different populations were producing varied toolkits adapted to local needs, materials, and traditions. You watch another flake come free. To your inexperienced eye, it might look like someone breaking a rock. To the person holding it, angles matter. Force matters. The quality of the stone matters. A mistake wastes useful material. Knowledge lives in hands. That may be one of the first things this world teaches you. Almost nothing important is written down. Yet information surrounds you. Someone knows which plants can be eaten. Someone recognizes where water remains during dry periods. Someone remembers the movements of animals. Someone understands how weather changes the behavior of prey. Someone knows where suitable stone can be found many kilometers away. A child nearby watches the tool maker. No formal lesson begins. There is no classroom. The child simply watches. Perhaps tomorrow the child will imitate the movement with an unimportant stone. Perhaps an older person will correct the angle with a gesture. Knowledge moves quietly from one mind to another. You sit near the edge of the firelight. The ground feels hard beneath you. A layer of vegetation or hide may soften a sleeping place. But nobody has prepared anything resembling your mattress. Your back is already filing a complaint. Still, comfort is relative. The fire provides warmth. The shelter blocks some wind. Other people provide security. And the location itself reflects experience accumulated over generations. A woman returns from beyond the illuminated area carrying gathered material. Another person examines what she has brought. Nearby, food is divided. It is tempting to imagine prehistoric people surviving mainly through spectacular hunts. Because large animal bones and stone weapons make dramatic museum displays, yet gathering plant foods, shellfish, small animals, eggs, insects, nuts, roots, and seasonal fruits could be enormously important depending on environment. The quieter work of obtaining food often leaves quieter archaeological evidence. That creates one of the great difficulties of entering this period. Stone survives beautifully. Conversation does not. Wood usually disappears. Plant fibers decay. Songs vanish completely. A woven container might serve a family every day and leave almost nothing behind after 60 millennia. Archaeologists therefore reconstruct these lives from fragments, and the fragments are uneven. Even something as fundamental as language remains partly hidden. Humans living around you almost certainly possess sophisticated systems of communication. But exactly when fully modern language developed, and how closely ancient speech resembled later human language, remains difficult to establish. Anatomy, genetics, cognition, and archaeology provide clues, yet none preserves an actual conversation from this fire. You listen anyway. Voices rise and fall. You cannot know the words. Perhaps someone is describing tomorrow's route. Perhaps a parent is calming a child. Perhaps somebody is making a joke about the person who nearly dropped dinner into the fire. That last possibility is impossible to prove. Of course, but human beings managing to tease one another around campfires would hardly be shocking. A small object passes between two people. In some archaeological sites dating to the broader Middle Stone Age and later periods, researchers have found ochre, pierced shells, beads, and other objects that suggest decoration or symbolic behaviour existed long before cities. One lesser-known detail is how far certain materials sometimes travelled. Stone or shells found at prehistoric sites could originate considerable distances away, suggesting movement, exchange, or social connections extending beyond a single camp. The world around you may therefore be larger socially than it appears physically. The people beside this fire are not necessarily isolated. They may know other groups. They may meet them seasonally. Partners may move between communities. Materials, stories, techniques, and information may travel with them. You look beyond the shelter. Darkness covers everything, without artificial illumination. The night feels almost physical. The fire illuminates faces and hands, but only for a few meters. Beyond that circle, familiar landscape becomes uncertain territory. You hear something moving through grass. Nobody panics. One person looks toward the sound. Then conversation continues. The reaction reminds you that the people here understand this environment far better than you do. To you, the darkness contains mysteries. To them, it contains information. A call can identify an animal. Wind can carry scent. Tracks found earlier may explain sounds heard tonight. Even silence can matter. You begin to understand why describing these people simply as survivors feels inadequate. Survival is certainly demanding, but their lives also contain relationships, learning, preferences, memory, curiosity, and probably humour, affection, conflict, ritual, and imagination. They are not unfinished versions of you, nor are they waiting patiently for someone to invent agriculture so that history can finally get started. Agriculture is still tens of thousands of years away. Cities are farther away than almost anything you normally call ancient. Writing belongs to an unimaginably distant future. Yet human life is already complicated. The fire settles lower. Someone places another branch onto the embers. Sparks rise briefly, glowing orange before disappearing into darkness. You feel the temperature falling. People gradually move closer together. A child leans against an adult. Tools are placed within reach. Food remnants are moved or covered. The ordinary routines of evening begin without ceremony, and as you watch them, the greatest mystery of 60,000 years ago becomes strangely simple. So much happened here. Almost all of it disappeared. Tomorrow, you will begin looking more closely at the people inhabiting this enormous world, including populations moving beyond Africa and other kinds of humans already living across Eurasia. But tonight, you remain beside the fire, smoke drifts upward, stone rests beside sleeping hands, beyond the shelter. Wind passes through the grass exactly as it did long before anyone thought to record history. And for the first time, 60,000 years ago no longer feels empty. It feels crowded with lives you can almost see. The fire is still glowing when you wake. For a few seconds, you forget how far from your own world you've travelled. Then the smell of ash returns. The hard ground beneath you returns. So does the faint morning chill pressing against your skin. Around the shelter, people are already moving. Someone stirs embers with a stick. Someone else carries water in a container made from material that would rarely survive long enough to reach an archaeological museum. A child rubs sleep from their eyes and watches an adult prepare food. Nothing feels hurried. Nothing feels ceremonial. It is simply morning. And as you watch the camp come back to life, you begin to understand that this small group is only one tiny part of a much larger human story already unfolding across the world. By roughly 60,000 years ago, Homo sapiens had lived in Africa for an immense span of time. Our species did not suddenly appear at this moment and immediately begin marching across the planet. The story is far less tidy. Human populations had already been moving, separating, reconnecting, adapting and changing for many generations. Some groups remained within Africa, others moved into regions beyond it. Earlier expansions may have occurred long before the better-known migrations that eventually contributed strongly to populations across Eurasia. You stand and stretch, your shoulders protest slightly. Prehistoric bedding has not improved overnight. Beyond the shelter, the horizon is brightening. You walk with several people toward open ground. The landscape ahead does not resemble a political map. There are no borders, no signs, no names painted onto anything. Yet territories still matter. People know rivers, coastlines, valleys, hills, dry zones, hunting areas, sources of stone, and places where food appears at certain times of year. Knowledge creates its own map. A person walking beside you points toward a distant ridge. Perhaps there is water beyond it. Perhaps another group lives there. Perhaps the ridge marks a route followed seasonally. You cannot ask. Their spoken language is lost to you. Still, the gesture is enough to remind you that this world is inhabited socially as well as physically. You may imagine 60,000 years ago as nearly empty, in population terms, compared with the modern world. It certainly is. But empty is the wrong word. Across Africa, human communities occupy very different environments. Some live near coasts, others move through grasslands, woodlands, river valleys, or drier interior landscapes. Farther northeast, routes through Sinai, the Levant, or areas around the Red Sea provide possible corridors linking Africa with Western Asia. Exactly how people moved through these regions, how often they did so, and which migrations contributed most to later populations remain subjects of continuing research. The evidence does not describe one grand departure, it suggests many movements. Some may have failed. Some may have ended with populations dying out locally. Some may have been absorbed into other groups. Others eventually carried descendants farther east. You continue walking. The morning air warms slowly, dry grass brushes your legs. A bird rises suddenly from the ground and disappears across the pale sky. The people around you barely react. You, however, are beginning to realize that while this landscape belongs to Homo sapiens, other landscapes farther away belong to other humans. If you traveled north and west into parts of Eurasia, you could encounter Neanderthals. They had already lived across Europe and Western Asia for hundreds of thousands of years. They were not lumbering caricatures waiting helplessly to disappear. They made tools, they controlled fire, they hunted large animals, they cared for injured individuals. They occupied harsh environments that would make your current morning walk feel pleasantly mild. Farther east, the human picture becomes even more intriguing. Genetic evidence has revealed the existence of Denisovans, an ancient human population related to Neanderthals. Although their physical appearance and geographic range remain much less clearly understood, most of what initially revealed them came not from a complete skeleton, but from remarkably small remains and ancient DNA. There is something wonderfully strange about that. An entire branch of humanity can return to scientific awareness through fragments so small that a person in this camp might not bother picking them up. The world of 60,000 years ago is therefore not occupied by one kind of human. You are living during an era of overlapping human lineages. That fact changes the feeling of the landscape. Imagine walking for weeks, crossing mountains or river systems, and eventually meeting people who are recognizably human but physically different from your own community. What would that encounter feel like? Would you immediately recognize similarities? Would clothing, gesture, tool-making, or speech feel familiar? Would the meeting be cautious, friendly, hostile, ordinary? There is no single answer. Modern genetic evidence tells us that contact occurred between Homo sapiens and other human groups. Many people living today outside Africa carry a small percentage of Neanderthal ancestry, while some populations, especially in parts of Oceania and Asia, also carry Denisovan ancestry. That means encounters were not merely distant sightings across valleys. At least some resulted in children. Exactly how often such relationships occurred and under what social circumstances remains impossible to reconstruct with confidence. Genetics can reveal ancestry. It cannot tell you whether two people met beside a river, during a seasonal gathering, after conflict, or through long periods of neighbouring contact. The people around you stop near a patch of vegetation. Several begin searching carefully. You watch hands moving through leaves. A root is loosened from the soil. Food gathering resumes. The global drama of human evolution continues quietly through activities like this. No one here knows they belong to a species called Homo sapiens. No one knows that Neanderthals have a scientific name. No one thinks in terms of migration models or genetic admixture. People simply know themselves and the communities around them. Their social categories may involve family, language, territory, ancestry, friendship, rivalry, or customs. The labels you bring from the future would mean nothing. You kneel and help dig. Your technique is poor. A nearby person watches you struggle and takes over with the calm expression of someone observing a visitor who has somehow never encountered dirt before. You suspect you have just been judged. Fairly. The root comes free. It is placed with several others. Daily survival continues. And this ordinary activity points toward an important truth. Long-distance population movements probably did not resemble organized expeditions with a destination marked somewhere far ahead. There was no announcement that humanity would now settle another continent. Movement could happen incrementally. A group follows resources, children grow, families separate, new territory becomes familiar. Another generation moves farther, over centuries. Tiny changes in where people live can become enormous geographic expansions. Today you might cross thousands of kilometers in a plane while half asleep and complaining about legroom. Here, distance is experienced step by step. A river can become a major obstacle. A desert can close a route for generations. A wetter climate can suddenly make previously difficult regions easier to cross. Sea levels matter too. During cooler periods of the Pleistocene, lower sea levels exposed more land in some regions, reshaping coastlines and narrowing certain water crossings. Climate, therefore, does not merely provide background scenery. It alters the possible routes of human life. You begin walking back toward camp. The sun is higher now. Heat gathers on exposed rock. Your feet already feel the distance as the shelter comes into view. Children appear near the edge of the camp. Someone is laughing, someone else is repairing or sharpening a tool. Smoke rises from the fire. Everything looks small again, but you no longer see the camp as isolated. Invisible lines connect it to a much wider story. Somewhere far away, other Homo sapiens are waking beside other fires. Beyond them, Neanderthals move through colder terrain, still farther east. Populations whose names will be forgotten for tens of thousands of years continue living their own ordinary lives. Humanity is scattered, not hopelessly scattered, not organized either. It exists as countless local worlds. Some meet, some separate, some disappear. Some leave descendants who will one day carry tiny pieces of ancient encounters inside their DNA. You sit once more beside the shelter. The fire is brighter in daylight but less impressive. A stone tool rests near your hand. Someone offers you a portion of food. You take it, and the thought settles quietly. 60,000 years ago. There is no single human world. There are many. Tomorrow. You will begin paying closer attention to one of them, not through migration or genetics, but through the ordinary rhythm of waking, eating, working, and living beside a rock shelter. For now, you remain among a humanity already spread across landscapes larger than any person here could ever see. Morning arrives quietly beside the rock shelter. There is no bell, no clock, no person announcing that the day has begun. Instead, daylight slowly changes the colour of the stone above you. The grey surface becomes warmer as the sun rises. Shadows retreat from the entrance. Somewhere beyond the shelter, birds begin calling from scattered trees and low vegetation. The fire has nearly died. Only a few red embers remain beneath a soft layer of ash. You lie still for a moment. Around you, bodies begin to shift. Someone coughs. A child turns over. An adult reaches toward the remains of the fire and pulls several pieces of charcoal together. This is how the camp wakes. Not all at once, gradually. You sit up. The ground beneath you is uneven, though some care has clearly gone into choosing where people sleep. Depending on the environment and available materials, people could use hides, grasses, branches, or other plant matter to create a cleaner and slightly softer surface. Archaeological evidence from prehistoric sites sometimes preserves traces of bedding made from vegetation. Although such remains are rare because organic materials normally decay, that is one of the frustrating little jokes archaeology likes to play. Stone survives for tens of thousands of years. Your comfortable mattress does not. A woman crouches beside the embers. She places dry material close to the heat and blows gently. Smoke curls upward for several seconds. Nothing happens. Then a tiny flame appears. Another person adds a thin branch. The flame grows. Soon you hear the familiar crackling sound again. Fire is central to life here. By 60,000 years ago, humans had been using controlled fire for an extremely long time. Fire provides warmth, light, protection, and a means of cooking food. It can also help process certain plants, harden wooden implements, discourage predators, and transform a dark shelter into a social space after sunset. Yet fire requires work. Wood must be collected. Fuel must be kept dry when possible. Someone must maintain the embers. If the flame disappears completely, relighting it may be more troublesome than simply reaching for a modern match. That makes yesterday's fire part of today's morning. You watch as flames take hold. The smell reaches you almost immediately. Smoke mixes with damp earth, old ash, hides, and the faint scent of food. Someone brings forward pieces left from the previous day. Breakfast is not separated neatly into the categories you know. There are no cereal boxes, no coffee. No person staring silently into a refrigerator hoping something new has appeared overnight. Food depends on what the group has gathered, hunted, preserved, or carried. Some items may be eaten cold, others are warmed near the fire. A root is placed close to the embers. A child receives a small portion and begins eating without ceremony. You're offered something as well. You accept. Its texture is unfamiliar. You chew slowly. Nobody seems especially interested in your opinion. Daily life has already moved on. Near the edge of the shelter, several tools lie grouped together: stone flakes, scrapers, points, pieces of wood, perhaps cordage or containers made from plant fibers, sinew, hide, bark, or other materials. Much of this equipment would disappear from the archaeological record. What survives 60,000 years into your future is only a distorted sample of what surrounds you now. This matters because prehistoric people are often imagined carrying little more than stone. In reality, stone may simply be what time allows you to see. Wooden digging sticks could be essential for gathering underground foods. Containers could carry water, plants, tools, or infants. Cordage could bind objects together. Hides could become clothing, bedding, windbreaks, or carrying material. The world around you contains technology made from things destined to vanish. One person sits with a stone core resting against the ground. You recognize the familiar tapping sound from yesterday. A controlled strike removes a flake. It is examined. Another follows. Tool production is not random smashing. The maker understands the properties of the material. Some stone fractures predictably, some does not. A useful edge can be dangerously sharp. You touch one carefully. It is thinner than you expected. The edge catches the morning light. Nearby, another person works on a wooden shaft. Perhaps it will become part of a hunting weapon. Perhaps a digging tool. You cannot be certain. That uncertainty is normal here. Even archaeologists studying well-preserved sites sometimes disagree about the exact purpose of particular tools, especially when one object could serve several tasks. A scraper might work hide. A sharp flake might cut meat, plants, fibers, or wood. Prehistoric toolkits are practical rather than conveniently labelled for future researchers. You move toward the shelter entrance. The air outside is cooler than the growing light suggested. A breeze travels across the open ground. Children are already awake. One carries a small stick and imitates an adult's movements. Another crouches near a patch of dirt, drawing lines with a finger. You watch for a while. There is no separate childhood world filled entirely with toys and scheduled lessons. Children are surrounded by adult activity. They observe food preparation, tool making, gathering, conversation, movement through the landscape. They learn through repetition and participation. A small child picks up a stone. An older person gently removes it and replaces it with another. Perhaps the first one was useful. Perhaps it was sharp. Perhaps the adult simply knows that handing a child an excellent cutting edge is a poor start to the morning. Some things remain surprisingly timeless. A few people begin preparing to leave camp. They check tools, containers are gathered. One person adjusts something around the body, perhaps a hide covering or carrying strap. Another examines the sky. Weather matters constantly. There is no forecast arriving through a glowing screen. Cloud movement, wind direction, temperature, animal behavior, and accumulated memory provide information. The landscape itself is read. You notice that nobody seems to debate what should be packed. People know what they need. That knowledge comes from doing the same kinds of tasks again and again. It also comes from mistakes. A forgotten tool can cost time. A poor route can waste energy. A badly chosen campsite can mean cold, insects, water problems, or danger. You begin to understand why routine is so important. Life here may appear uncertain from your perspective, but people reduce uncertainty through habits. Fire is revived. Food is divided, tools are checked, children are watched, water is collected, plans are communicated. These small repeated actions create stability. One lesser-known clue to such routine comes from microscopic evidence. At some prehistoric sites, researchers can identify tiny plant remains, residues, ash layers, and repeated hearth locations, allowing them to reconstruct activities that once seemed almost invisible. A dark stain in sediment may represent a fire. Tiny starch grains can hint at plant processing, where patterns on a stone edge can suggest how it was used. The grand story of humanity can sometimes depend on details smaller than a grain of sand. You step farther outside. Sunlight now reaches the camp fully. The shelter looks less mysterious in daylight. It is simply stone, shade, smoke, people, and belongings. Yet that simplicity is deceptive. Every object around you represents decisions. Every routine depends on knowledge. Every person knows things you do not. Someone knows where water lies. Someone understands which roots are worth digging. Someone can repair a broken point. Someone can recognize the tracks of an animal you would never notice. No single person necessarily knows everything. The group itself becomes a kind of shared memory. That may be one of the deepest advantages of living together. Knowledge can be distributed, skills can be taught, food can be shared, children can be watched by more than one adult. Injury does not always mean immediate isolation. Human survival is not simply the story of stronger individuals, it is also the story of cooperation. The people leaving camp finally begin walking. You follow. Behind you, the fire continues to burn. A few people remain near the shelter. The children move between shadow and sunlight. The morning has fully arrived. Nothing spectacular has happened. No mammoth charge. No dramatic discovery. No sudden crisis. And that may be exactly why this morning matters. History is usually remembered through exceptional events, but most human life has always been made from ordinary ones. Waking, eating, preparing, teaching, repairing, walking, watching the weather, keeping a fire alive. You glance back once at the shelter. Smoke rises slowly against the brightening sky. Yesterday it looked like a fragile camp in a dangerous wilderness. Now it looks different. It looks like home. You leave the shelter after sunrise. The fire remains behind you, reduced now to a thin column of smoke curling into the pale sky. Ahead, the land opens slowly. There are no roads, no painted markers, no fence lines dividing one place from another. Yet the people walking beside you do not seem lost. Not even slightly. They move with the quiet certainty of people who know exactly where they are. You follow. At first, the route seems almost random. A patch of dry grass, a low ridge, a shallow depression in the ground, a cluster of darker vegetation farther ahead. But after a while, patterns begin to appear. One person pauses near a faint set of tracks. Another points toward a stand of trees. Someone else touches the soil with a hand, rubs it between their fingers, and then looks toward the horizon. The landscape is being read, not admired, not crossed blindly. Read. You begin to notice how much information is hidden in ordinary things. A broken stem can show that an animal passed recently. Fresh dung can reveal direction and timing. Bird calls may signal water or disturbance. Certain plants favour damp ground. A line of greener vegetation may indicate a seasonal stream even when no water is visible from where you stand. The people around you seem to collect these details without effort. To you, the plain ahead looks mostly empty. To them, it is crowded with signs. This kind of environmental knowledge would have been essential for hunter-gatherer communities living tens of thousands of years ago. Food is scattered. Water can be unpredictable. Animal movements change with season. Useful stone appears only in certain places. Shelter may be excellent in one valley and dangerous in another. A group that understands its territory can move efficiently. A group that does not wastes energy. And here, wasted energy matters. You step over a patch of loose stone. The sun is already warming your shoulders. The morning air carries the smell of dust, dry vegetation, and something faintly sweet from flowering plants nearby. One of the walkers stops. Everyone else slows automatically. There is no discussion you can understand. Still, the reason becomes obvious. Tracks. Several marks cross the soil. You crouch beside them. At first, you see almost nothing. Then one person traces the edge of a print with a finger, a hoof. Another print lies farther ahead. The spacing matters. The depth matters. The direction matters. Perhaps even the condition of the edges matters. Sharp edges may suggest recent passage. Wind-softened tracks may be older. You realize that this kind of skill cannot be learned from one successful afternoon. It grows through years of watching. Children would begin absorbing it early. They would see adults stop at prints. They would hear names and explanations. They would be corrected when they misunderstood something. Eventually, the landscape itself would become more legible. You look again at the tracks. They still mostly look like dents in dirt. You have some catching up to do. The group continues. Soon, the ground slopes downward. Vegetation thickens. A few insects hover in the warmer air. The people ahead spread out slightly. One bends to inspect a plant. Another tests the soil with a stick. Then, after several minutes, you see it. Water. Not a broad river. Not a sparkling lake. Just a shallow source partly concealed by reeds and low growth. To you, it is unimpressive. To everyone else, it is valuable. Water shapes movement more than almost anything. Prehistoric groups could not simply settle anywhere and assume supply would follow. Seasonal rainfall, springs, rivers, wetlands, and temporary pools influenced where people moved and how long they stayed. Even familiar sources could fail. A dry season might last longer than expected. A stream could shrink. Animals could crowd around the remaining water. Other groups might arrive. Knowing several possible sources would reduce risk. That knowledge might be carried in memory across generations. You watch people drink. Containers are filled. A child splashes one hand into the shallows and is gently moved aside. The water is not treated as scenery. It is managed. You cup some in your own hands. It feels surprisingly cold. The contrast with the warming air is pleasant. For a moment, you simply listen. Insects, birds, the soft movement of reeds, a distant animal call. Then someone makes a brief sound and points toward the mud. More tracks. Different ones this time. Several species have visited the same place. That makes sense. Water gathers life. It also gathers danger. Predators know this. Humans know this. Everyone drinks from the same geography. The group does not linger unnecessarily. You begin moving again. Now you understand part of the route. The water source was not discovered by luck. It was remembered. This is where prehistoric geography becomes difficult to imagine from the future. Modern maps preserve information outside the human mind. Here, much of the map lives inside people. A ridge is remembered because berries grow beyond it. A dry basin matters because water sometimes collects there after rain. A stand of trees marks shade. A rocky outcrop marks stone. A narrow pass may lead toward another valley. A coastline can provide shellfish at particular tides. The world is organized through experience. Some knowledge may also be social. A place might belong more strongly to one group than another. A route could be safe during one season and avoided during another. A distant valley may be associated with relatives, allies, rivals, or stories. Archaeology can reveal movement through raw materials. Stone carried far from its geological source shows that people travelled or exchanged objects across substantial distances. Shell ornaments found inland can hint at connections reaching toward coasts. But the human meaning behind those movements is much harder to recover. A stone from 40 kilometers away might reflect a hunting journey, or trade, or marriage between groups, or seasonal gathering, or a chain of exchanges involving people who never met the original collector. The object survives. The relationship usually does not. You continue walking toward a higher ground. The path, if it can be called that, follows the easiest route through scattered rock. One person chooses a line that avoids steep loose slopes. Another occasionally looks backward. You start to see how movement itself is a skill. Travel is not simply walking from one point to another. It is managing effort, water, shade, children, older people, tools, food, weather, potential animals, potential strangers. A modern traveller might complain when a phone loses signal for 20 minutes. Here, no signal exists at all, and yet nobody is disconnected from the environment. If anything, the opposite is true. People are receiving information constantly. Clouds form in the distance. Someone notices. The pace changes slightly. You look up. The clouds seem harmless to you. Perhaps they are. Perhaps the others know something about wind direction that you do not. Weather forecasting here is not exact, but it does not need to be useless. Repeated observation builds expectations. Certain cloud shapes, changes in wind, animal behavior, temperature shifts, seasonal patterns. No one needs to predict the precise minute of rainfall. Knowing that a storm is likely before evening may be enough to alter where the group travels. You reach a ridge. The view opens below you. The land stretches farther than you expected. Patches of woodland break the open country. A narrow line of vegetation suggests another watercourse, far beyond it. The horizon blurs in heat. One of your companions points across the distance. Several others look. You follow their gaze. Nothing obvious is there. Then you notice a faint column rising upward. Smoke. Another fire. Another group. Perhaps. The distance is difficult to judge. No one appears alarmed, but the smoke is noticed. That alone tells you something. The landscape is not only tracked for animals and plants, it is tracked for people. A distant fire can mean relatives, visitors, competition, news, opportunity, risk. The exact meaning depends on context you do not possess. You stand quietly while the others exchange a few words. Then the group turns away from the ridge. No one heads toward the smoke. Not today. You descend along another slope as the sun climbs. Heat settles over the open ground. Your mouth is already dry again. The people beside you conserve movement naturally. They do not wander. They do not climb unnecessarily. They pause in shade when it makes sense. Small efficiencies accumulate. That may be one reason experienced knowledge matters so much. You could survive a single mistake, maybe several, but repeated poor choices become expensive. A bad route cost energy. A missed water source cost more. A misunderstood animal track wastes hours. A poorly chosen campsite can ruin sleep. The landscape rewards attention. By the time the shelter comes back into view, you are tired. The people around you seem less impressed by the distance. Children near camp notice the returning group. Someone comes forward. Water is shared. A few gathered items are placed near the fire. Conversation begins. Information has returned with you. Not written, not drawn, spoken. Where animals were seen, where the water remains, what plants are ready. Whether smoke appeared beyond the ridge, the day has produced a map that exists mostly in memory. You sit down slowly. Your legs appreciate the decision. Beyond the shelter. Evening light begins to soften the land. Yesterday, this place seemed like wilderness. Today, you know better. It is not empty. It is named in ways you cannot hear. Measured in walking time, marked by water, animals, plants, stone, weather, memory. And somewhere beyond the ridge, another fire is burning in a landscape that somebody else knows just as well. By the next morning, you have stopped expecting every day to begin with a hunt. That assumption belonged to your own imagination. Large animals are dramatic. Spear points look impressive in museums. Bones preserve well. A quiet patch of edible roots does not have the same theatrical appeal. But today, you begin to see how much daily survival depends on food that does not run away. The air is cool when you leave camp. A thin mist clings to the lower ground. Your feet brush through damp vegetation. and droplets collect along your ankles. Several people carry digging sticks and containers. No one moves with the tense focus you noticed when animal tracks appeared yesterday. This feels different, more methodical, more familiar. You walk toward an area where the soil is darker and the plant growth thicker. One person kneels almost immediately. A wooden stick presses into the ground. The earth loosens. Roots appear. The work looks simple until you try it. You choose a nearby patch and push downward. The stick slips. Your hands move awkwardly. The root breaks. Someone beside you watches for a moment, then demonstrates a better angle. Again, prehistoric competence quietly humiliates the visitor from the future. You adjust, this time. More of the root comes free. It is placed in a container with several others. No celebration follows. The group simply continues. For hunter-gatherers, plant foods could provide carbohydrates, fats, vitamins, and dependable seasonal calories. The exact balance between hunting and gathering varied enormously by environment. A coastal group might depend heavily on shellfish and fish. People in woodland settings could exploit nuts, fruits, roots, and small animals. In drier regions, knowledge of underground storage organs and seasonal plant growth could be essential. There was no universal prehistoric menu. That is important whenever the phrase Stone Age diet appears in modern life, usually attached to a product that costs far more than a root should. It tends to flatten thousands of different environments into one imaginary dinner plate. Real diets were local, flexible, seasonal, and often opportunistic. You continue digging. The smell of disturbed soil rises around you. It is rich and damp. Nearby, insects move between leaves. A bird calls repeatedly from somewhere behind a low tree. Children are present too. One carries smaller items. Another imitates the digging motion. A younger child spends more time examining a beetle than gathering food. No one seems particularly surprised. Learning and distraction can apparently coexist in every era. Farther ahead, several people begin collecting seeds or small fruits. The work is repetitive. Pick, inspect, carry, move, repeat. There is no single dramatic moment when dinner is secured. Instead, food accumulates gradually. That may be one of the most important things to understand about gathering. A successful day does not always look exciting. It looks full. A container grows heavier. A pile becomes larger. Enough small choices produce a meal. You walk toward a tree where several people are examining the branches. Some fruits are ripe, others are ignored. Knowledge determines which is which. This knowledge must be precise. A plant can be edible at one stage and unpleasant at another. Some parts can be eaten while others cause problems. Certain roots require cooking. Some seeds need grinding or soaking. A person unfamiliar with the landscape could make mistakes very quickly. You look at the plants around you. Most are anonymous. Green leaves, stems, flowers, possible food, possible stomach disaster. You wisely decide to copy everyone else. The archaeological record makes this part of life difficult to reconstruct because plant remains usually decay, still. Microscopic residues, charred seeds, starch grains, phytoliths, grinding stones, and preserved plant fragments can reveal surprisingly complex food use. At some ancient sites, people were processing plants long before farming appeared. That matters because agriculture did not invent the idea of understanding plants. It reorganized a relationship humans already knew extremely well. People here know when plants appear, where they grow, which parts are useful, how long they keep, how they respond to fire, whether animals compete for them. That knowledge is not primitive botany, it is practical botany, and survival depends on it. You sit for a short rest. The sun has climbed higher. Warmth now reaches the ground where mist lingered earlier. Someone passes you a small fruit. You taste it. Sour. Very sour. Your face reacts before you can control it. A child notices and laughs. You have now provided entertainment as well as labor. A useful contribution. The group begins moving again. Soon you reach a wetter area. The smell changes. Mud, water, decaying vegetation. Tiny insects hover in the air near the shallows. People search beneath stones and among reeds. Depending on location, freshwater foods could include fish, shellfish, amphibians, bird eggs, aquatic plants, or small animals along coastlines. Marine resources could be even richer. Shell middens from later periods can become enormous, but much earlier humans also exploited coastal foods where conditions allowed. The frustrating part is that many ancient shorelines are now underwater because sea levels changed dramatically during the Pleistocene. Entire landscapes once occupied by people have vanished beneath modern seas. That creates a literal gap in the archaeological record. You can excavate only what remains accessible. A prehistoric camp beside an Ice Age coastline might now sit far offshore. No amount of careful digging on today's beach will find it. This means some ancient coastal traditions may have been more important than surviving sites suggest. You watch one person pry something edible from a shell. The gesture is small, the implication is large. Food does not need to be hunted in the heroic sense. It needs to be obtained efficiently. That principle shapes the entire day. Later, the group reaches a patch where nuts or hard seeds are being collected. A few are cracked, others are carried back. Some may be processed near camp, grinding, pounding, roasting, soaking, or heating can transform foods that are difficult to eat raw. Cooking itself dramatically expands what humans can digest. Heat softens tissues, kills many pathogens, changes starches, makes some nutrients easier to access. The fire waiting back at camp is therefore not merely warmth. It is part of the food system. You begin the return journey with more weight than you carried outward. The container in your hands is not enormous. Your arms still notice. A person beside you carries considerably more and does not appear interested in sympathy. You continue along the route. Someone suddenly stops to collect a handful of leaves. Another digs up several more roots. Gathering does not occur only at one destination. People take advantage of useful resources encountered along the way. The landscape becomes something like an enormous pantry, although one with no shelves, no labels, and several items capable of poisoning you. The comparison is imperfect. Still, you begin to understand the mental catalogue required. Season matters. Rainfall matters, fire matters, animal activity matters. A patch that was productive last month may offer little today. People must remember many places. They must also notice changes. This creates another form of intelligence that rarely receives dramatic illustrations. Timing. Knowing where food exists is useful. Knowing when it exists is better. When you finally return to the rock shelter. The afternoon light has softened. Several people who remained behind come forward. The gathered food is placed near the fire. There is no obvious private ownership over every item. Food sharing within hunter-gatherer groups can reduce risk, especially when resources are unpredictable. A successful hunter may not succeed tomorrow. A productive gathering area may fail next season. Sharing spreads uncertainty across the group. Exactly how prehistoric people organized ownership, obligation, generosity, and exchange at this particular period cannot be reconstructed in detail. Modern hunter-gatherer societies show many different arrangements, and they cannot simply be copied backward through time. Still, cooperation was almost certainly deeply important. You watch food being sorted. Some roots go closer to the fire. Seeds are separated. A child receives something immediately. An older person is handed a portion without needing to fetch it. Nothing about this scene feels accidental. The group survives through individual knowledge, but also through circulation. Food moves between hands, so does information. The fire begins to smell different as plant foods warm. Sweetness mixes with smoke. You sit near the edge of the shelter and rub dirt from your fingers. The day has been quiet. No large animal fell. No spear flew. No predator appeared. Yet the group has returned with calories, nutrients, water, and useful knowledge about what is ready in the landscape. You think again about museums, stone points, large bones, impressive hunting scenes. They are real parts of this world, but they are only parts. Much of human survival may look more like what you did today. Digging, picking, carrying, remembering, sharing. The hidden labour of finding food, one root, seed, fruit, shell, and leaf at a time. The fire crackles. Someone places another root near the embers. You lean closer. Tonight's meal has no grand story attached to it, and perhaps that is exactly why it deserves one. The next day begins with more tension than the last. Not fear, not panic, just attention. The people preparing to leave camp are carrying different tools now. You notice longer wooden shafts, stone points, lengths of binding material. A few items are checked more carefully than yesterday's gathering containers. The atmosphere is still calm, but the purpose has changed. Today, you are following hunters. The morning is cold enough that your breath is faintly visible. The ground feels firm beneath your feet. Low sunlight stretches shadows across the open land, and every ridge seems sharper in the early light. You walk in silence for long stretches. Conversation still happens, but less often. The group is listening, watching, measuring distance. The first tracks appear near a patch of softer soil. One person kneels. A finger touches the edge of a print. Another person studies the direction. Then everyone moves again. You have already learned that tracking is not simply recognizing an animal's footprint. It means building a story from fragments. How many animals passed? How long ago were they walking slowly, running, feeding? Was one injured? Did they move toward water, toward shade, away from danger? The ground becomes a page. You're still learning the alphabet. The hunters beside you are reading paragraphs. By around 60,000 years ago, Homo sapiens were capable of sophisticated cooperative hunting in many environments. Though techniques varied enormously by place and prey, some animals could be approached closely, others required ambush. Some were driven toward natural barriers. Small prey might be trapped or captured in ways that leave almost no archaeological trace. Large animals attract attention because their bones survive well. But hunting strategies were never one simple universal method. You climb gradually toward higher ground. The wind changes. One hunter stops immediately. Everyone else pauses. You do not know why until the group shifts position. Then it becomes clear. Scent. If the wind carries human smell toward prey. An approach can fail long before anyone gets close. The hunters alter their route. You follow. This is slower than you expected. Much slower. Modern images of prehistoric hunting often skip straight to the dramatic moment. Spear raised. Animal nearby, everyone frozen in heroic poses. Real hunting contains a great deal of walking, waiting, searching, losing tracks, finding them again, choosing not to attack, turning back, trying later. For several hours, almost nothing happens. And that is probably normal. You cross open ground, then skirt a cluster of low trees at one point. The group pauses in shade. Water is shared. Someone checks a stone point attached to a wooden shaft. The attachment deserves your attention. A point is useful only if it stays where it belongs. Bindings could involve sinew, plant fibre, hide strips, or other materials. Natural adhesives such as resins or gums may also have been used in complex hafting systems in prehistoric Africa and elsewhere. This kind of composite technology requires planning. Different materials must be collected, prepared, combined, sometimes heated, repaired. A finished weapon may therefore represent several separate chains of knowledge. The stone itself survives. The glue usually does not. That imbalance has hidden a great deal of prehistoric craftsmanship. You look at the weapon again. It no longer seems simple. Eventually, the hunters move. The pace becomes slower. One points toward distant movement. You narrow your eyes. At first, You see nothing. Then shapes appear. Several grazing animals, too far away to identify clearly. The group lowers itself behind vegetation. You copy them. Your knees immediately remind you that prehistoric hunting was designed without concern for your comfort. Nobody rushes. The animals feed. One raises its head. Wait, it lowers its head again. A hunter gestures. Two people separate and begin moving along a different line. You start to understand. Positioning matters. Perhaps the group is trying to approach from multiple directions. Perhaps they're anticipating where the animals will move. Perhaps only a few hunters will make the final approach. There are many possible strategies, and archaeology rarely gives enough detail to reconstruct one exact sequence. You remain where you are. Time passes. The sunlight feels warmer now. A small insect crawls across your sleeve. You resist the urge to brush it away dramatically. The animals continue feeding. One hunter begins advancing very slowly, step, pause, step, pause. There is something almost meditative about it. Every movement is controlled. The hunter uses uneven ground for cover. A slight dip in the landscape hides part of the approach. Another person moves farther to one side. Then an animal looks up. Everything stops. For a long moment, nobody moves. You hear wind passing through grass. Then the animal lowers its head. Movement resumes. This could continue for an hour, perhaps longer. Hunting demands patience because failure is expensive. A missed throw does not merely mean disappointment. It means lost energy, possibly a damaged weapon, possibly an injured animal that escapes, possibly hours of effort with no food returned to camp. That makes judgment important. When to attack matters as much as how. The distance closes. The animals begin to shift. Something has changed. Perhaps they sensed movement. Perhaps the wind turned. Perhaps one became nervous for reasons unrelated to the hunters. The herd starts walking. The hunters respond immediately. Two move faster. Another holds position. You stay well behind. Then the animals break into a run. There is sudden movement, but not chaos. A weapon is cast. Another follows. You cannot see clearly what happens. Dust rises, hooves strike the ground. The herd changes direction. Most animals continue away. One does not. The group moves after it. You follow at a distance. The chase is not long, but it feels much longer from inside it. When you reach the hunters, they are gathered around the animal. There is no triumphal shouting, no cinematic celebration. The mood is practical. The animal has provided food. Now work begins. Stone edges are brought out. Cutting must be done efficiently. Meat is heavy. Hide is useful. Tendons can become binding material. Bones can become tools or be broken for marrow. Fat is valuable. Different parts matter in different ways. Large animal hunting can provide substantial calories, but transporting everything back to camp creates its own problem. A carcass is much heavier than enthusiasm. The group must decide what to carry first. You watch cutting begin. The scene remains PG-13 in your mind because your attention shifts to process rather than detail. The stone flakes are effective, extremely effective. A fresh edge slices far better than its humble appearance suggests. You realize again how misleading the word simple can be. A tool does not need metal to work well. One person removes a useful section of hide. Another prepares meat for transport. Someone works quickly around joints. Tasks divide naturally. Perhaps individuals specialize through experience. Perhaps everyone knows several roles. The exact social organization of hunting groups this far back is difficult to recover. Later societies show enormous variation, and there is no reason to assume one fixed pattern for all prehistoric communities. What is visible here is cooperation. One person alone would struggle to track, approach, kill, process, defend, and transport large prey efficiently. Together. The group can divide the problem. A smaller detail catches your attention. Several bones are not immediately discarded. They are set aside. Bone can become raw material, points, awls, retouchers, handles. Other implements, Some organic technologies existed far earlier than older stereotypes once suggested. The Stone Age was never made only of stone. You help carry a portion of meat. It is heavier than you expected. The return journey becomes slower. Nobody complains. Or perhaps they do. But you cannot understand the language. Either way, there is work to finish. The sun has shifted westward. Flies begin to appear. The smell of the animal attracts attention. Predators and scavengers may also notice. That creates another reason not to linger. You move steadily toward camp. At one point, someone looks behind. Another scans a ridge. Hunting does not end when prey falls. Food must still arrive home. The fire is visible before the shelter itself. Smoke rises through late afternoon light. Children notice the returning group. People come forward. The atmosphere changes. There is interest now. Movement. Hands reaching to help. The food is placed near the working area. Some portions may be cooked soon. Others may be processed for later use if conditions allow. The animal becomes many resources: food, hide, bone, sinew, fat, possibly tools, possibly fuel in some environments. Nothing is viewed only as dinner. You sit down near the edge of camp. Your shoulders ache from carrying weight. Yesterday, you spent hours gathering small foods. Today, one animal has returned far more concentrated energy. Yet the contrast does not mean one strategy replaces the other. Gathering is often dependable. Hunting can produce large returns but also large failures. A group that combines different resources reduces risk. Tomorrow's hunt may find nothing. Roots may still be there. The fire begins to brighten as evening comes. Meat warms near the flames. The smell spreads through camp. Children sit closer. Tools are cleaned. Weapons are inspected. Perhaps one point must be replaced. Perhaps another shaft needs repair. Nothing in today's success guarantees tomorrow's. You think about the moment before the animals ran. Hours of patient work compressed into a few seconds. That is the part usually remembered. But now you know the truth behind it. The hunt was mostly attention, tracks, wind, distance, silence, judgment, cooperation, and afterward, carrying, a great deal of carrying. You lean back against stone. Night settles slowly over the shelter. The fire crackles. Someone begins dividing food, and hunting, once imagined as the grand center of prehistoric life, now seems less like a heroic spectacle and more like what it truly is here. One careful strategy among many for keeping a small human world alive. The next morning, you stay closer to the shelter after yesterday's long hunt. Nobody seems interested in immediately crossing half the landscape again. The fire burns steadily. Smoke drifts beneath the rock overhang before slipping into the open air. Near the entrance, several people sit with pieces of stone spread around them. At first glance, the scene looks almost peaceful. Then the tapping begins. A hard strike. A pause. Another strike. A thin flake breaks free and lands on the ground. You move closer. The person working does not look up. Their attention remains fixed on the stone. You recognize this process now, but only from a distance. Today, you're close enough to see how deliberate it really is. The stone is held at an angle. A hammerstone comes down, not randomly, not with brute force. The blow lands near a prepared edge. Another flake separates. Its surface catches the light. The shape is sharp, thin, and surprisingly regular. You pick up a discarded fragment, carefully. The edge could cut your finger more easily than you would like. Around 60,000 years ago, stone tool making had already accumulated an extraordinarily deep history. Humans and earlier hominins had been shaping stone for far more than 1,000,000 years. And by this period, many populations were using prepared core techniques, producing flakes and points through sequences that required planning before the final strike. That is what you are watching now. The useful piece does not simply appear, it is prepared into existence. The maker first chooses suitable raw material. Not every rock works. Some fracture cleanly, others crumble or split unpredictably. Fine-grained stone can produce sharp edges, but good material may be found only in certain places. That means the stone in front of you has a geography. Perhaps it came from a nearby outcrop. Perhaps someone carried it for many kilometers. Perhaps it passed between groups. You cannot tell by looking at the finished tool alone. The person beside the fire turns the core in one hand. Another blow follows. A flake comes away. Then another. The pattern is almost rhythmic. Tap, turn, inspect, tap. You begin to notice that every strike changes the possibilities of the next one. Remove too much, and the core may be spoiled. Choose the wrong angle and the fracture travels badly. Use too little force and nothing useful happens. The process feels less like breaking stone, and more like solving a physical puzzle. Only the puzzle cannot be reset. A child sits nearby watching. The child has a smaller stone in hand. They imitate the motion. The result is unimpressive. No one laughs. An older person adjusts the angle of the child's wrist. The child tries again. A tiny flake falls away. There is satisfaction in the face, though the piece is probably useless. Learning begins with imitation. You have seen this several times now. There is no formal boundary between work and education. Children absorb technique because technique surrounds them. A person does not need a written manual when knowledgeable hands are visible every day. You watch another tool being prepared. This one may become a point. Its edges are shaped more carefully. One side is adjusted, then the other, eventually. The piece is placed beside a wooden shaft. Now another technology begins. Binding material appears, possibly sinew, possibly plant fibre, perhaps a strip of hide. The point is positioned, the wrapping tightens. A dark substance may also be used near the join, resin or another adhesive. The combination matters. Stone alone cuts, wood alone gives reach. Binding holds them together. Adhesive can strengthen the attachment. The finished object is a composite tool, made from different materials gathered from different parts of the environment. Nothing about it is accidental. And this is where the familiar image of a crude Stone Age becomes increasingly unhelpful. The tool in front of you may look simple because it contains no metal, screws, plastic, or manufactured components. But complexity is not measured by how modern something looks. It is measured by knowledge. To build this weapon successfully, someone must understand stone fracture, wood selection, shaft straightness, binding behavior, possibly heat treatment, possibly adhesive preparation, balance, repair, use. The knowledge is distributed across materials. You glance toward the fire. Someone places a lump of resinous material near the heat. Too much heat could ruin it. Too little might leave it difficult to work. The temperature is judged by experience. No thermometer appears. No instructions are printed on the side. Again, memory does the work. You notice several damaged tools nearby. One point has broken near its tip. Another shaft has split slightly. Yesterday's hunt has left evidence. Instead of discarding everything, people repair what they can. A broken stone point may be reshaped into a smaller tool. A damaged shaft can sometimes be trimmed. Bindings can be replaced. Useful material is valuable. Carrying raw stone over distance takes effort. Good wood may require searching. Repair saves both. One of the more revealing things about prehistoric toolkits is how often an object's life continued through several forms. A large flake could be sharpened, used, resharpened, reduced, and eventually transformed into something much smaller. By the time archaeologists find it, they may be looking at the final chapter of a tool that once had a completely different shape. That can make interpretation tricky. A tiny finished object might originally have been much larger. Its current appearance records wear, repair, and repeated decisions. You rotate the discarded flake in your hand. Suddenly, even waste begins to look like biography. The ground around ancient napping areas can preserve thousands of fragments. Most are tiny, some a little more than chips, yet the pattern of those fragments can reveal where people sat, how tools were produced, and even which stages of manufacture happened at a site. The debris matters almost as much as the finished point. A future archaeologist might learn more from the scatter beneath your feet than from the impressive weapon beside you. That thought is oddly comforting. History is sometimes preserved by rubbish. You move toward another working area. Here, stone is not the focus. A person is smoothing wood, another handles bone. Yesterday's animal has already become raw material. A fragment of bone may be shaped into an awl, point, or other implement. A narrow object can pierce hide. A polished edge can help with scraping or working softer materials. Wooden tools, meanwhile, may serve as digging sticks, spear shafts, handles, clubs, or implements whose purpose will never be known because the wood will not survive. This creates a persistent distortion. Future museums will display what lasts: stone, bone when conditions are kind, teeth, shell, occasionally preserved fibres or wood. But daily life may depend heavily on things that disappear: a cordage loop, a carrying net, a wooden container, a woven bag, a hide strap, a simple basket. You imagine the camp stripped of every organic object that will eventually decay. Suddenly, it would look far more primitive. That stripped version is often what the distant future receives. The real camp is richer, softer, more varied, full of materials that bend, stretch, burn, rot, and vanish. One person picks up a stone flake and begins scraping hide. The movement is repetitive. Pull, reset. Pull again. The sound is soft. A faint rasping rhythm joins the crackle of the fire. Tool making and tool use blend together. There is no neat workshop separated from daily life. The shelter is sleeping place, kitchen, classroom, repair station, social space, and manufacturing area all at once. You sit beside the fire. The heat feels good on your hands. A child passes carrying a narrow stick. Another person tests the flexibility of a shaft. Someone inspects a newly shaped point against the light. Nothing dramatic happens. No invention is announced. No one declares a technological revolution. And yet improvement can happen here in tiny steps. A better binding method, a more reliable angle, a new way to prepare a core, a different adhesive mixture, a technique copied from another group. Over generations, small refinements accumulate. Exactly how quickly particular innovation spread is difficult to recover from archaeological remains alone. Some techniques may move with people, others may be reinvented independently. A method could flourish in one region, disappear, and return much later. Prehistoric technology does not move in a straight line toward the future. It branches, experiments, forgets, adapts. The afternoon passes slowly. Tools accumulate beside the fire. Some are new, some repaired. Some reduced from older forms. The hunters will carry several tomorrow. Gatherers will carry others. Children will keep watching. You place the discarded flake back on the ground. It feels wrong now to call it merely a piece of stone. It belongs to a chain of decisions stretching backward through teachers, materials, places, and generations. The fire pops softly. Someone tests a finished point with a thumb. Another begins wrapping a shaft. And as evening light reaches the shelter, you understand something that would be easy to miss from 60,000 years away. Technology here is not a collection of objects. It is knowledge made visible. By evening, the temperature falls quickly. The change is not dramatic at first. Sunlight still touches the higher ground. The rock shelter still holds some warmth from the day, but the air has changed. You feel it most clearly when the wind moves across your arms. Several people are already adjusting what they wear. Hides are pulled closer around shoulders. A child is wrapped more securely. Another person checks a piece of material near the fire. Yesterday, you paid attention to stone. Tonight, you begin noticing everything wrapped around the human body. Clothing this far back is difficult to reconstruct. That uncertainty exists for one simple reason. Most clothing disappears, leather decays, plant fibers rot, cordage vanishes. Wooden needles and fasteners rarely survive, if you judged prehistoric dress only by what normally reaches archaeologists. You might imagine people wandering through cold landscapes with remarkably little protection. That would be a dangerous misunderstanding. Humans living in cooler regions had to solve the problem of exposure. Warmth is not optional. Wind removes heat. Rain chills skin. Cold nights become worse when the body's tired or hungry. Anyone moving into higher latitudes, high elevations, or colder seasonal environments needs insulation. The people around you clearly understand this. You sit near the fire and watch someone handle a section of hide. The surface is uneven. It carries a faint animal smell mixed with smoke. One side is softer, the other has been worked. Preparing hide is labour. Skin taken from an animal cannot simply be thrown over the shoulders and expected to remain useful forever. Fat and tissue need removing. The hide may be stretched, scraped, dried, softened, possibly treated with smoke. Oils, fats, or other methods depending on local tradition. The process requires time. A stone scraper moves repeatedly across the surface. The sound is familiar now. A quiet rasp. Pull, reset, pull again. You touch a finished piece. It is softer than you expected. Not luxurious, not uniform, but flexible enough to wrap around the body. An adult nearby wears overlapping pieces that appear practical rather than decorative. Another person has something secured around the waist. Someone else carries material across the shoulders. Exactly how these garments are shaped is hard to determine. Some may be simple wraps, others could be fitted more closely. Fastening could involve cords, knots, sinew, bone pieces, wooden toggles, or combinations that leave little trace. You begin to see why clothing creates such an enormous blind spot. A sophisticated garment can vanish more completely than a crude stone flake. The stone remains. The garment becomes soil. That imbalance has shaped how the deep past is imagined. You glance at the children. One is wearing a small covering held close around the body. Another appears to have a separate layer around the feet or lower legs. Foot protection would make obvious sense in rough or cold environments. Yet proving exactly when different forms of footwear became common is difficult. Indirect clues can help. Changes in foot bones have sometimes been interpreted as possible evidence for habitual footwear in prehistoric populations. That interpretation is not a perfect timestamp. Bones respond to many pressures, but it offers one path into a technology that normally disappears. You look down at your own feet. The ground here is hard. Sharp stone sits everywhere. Thorns hide among plants. Walking barefoot through every landscape suddenly seems less like authenticity and more like poor planning. The wind strengthens. Someone places more wood on the fire. A shower of sparks rises. The heat reaches your face while your back remains cold. The contrast is immediate. You understand why clothing and fire work together. Neither solves every problem alone. Fire warms a place. Clothing carries warmth with the person. Shelter reduces exposure. Body position matters too. People sitting close together conserve heat more effectively than isolated individuals. The entire camp becomes a system for staying warm. There is a practical elegance to it. Nothing is wasted if it can serve another purpose. A hide may begin as part of an animal brought back for food. Then it becomes clothing, or bedding, or a windbreak, or a carrying surface. Sinew becomes cord. Bone becomes a point. Fat can become food or useful material. The animal does not enter camp as one resource. It enters as many. One person near you begins piercing hide. The tool is narrow and hard. Perhaps bone, perhaps stone. The holes are small. A cord is pulled through. You lean closer. This looks almost like sewing, although the technique may not resemble later stitch tailoring. Piercing and lacing alone can create fitted coverings. True-eyed needles, which allow finer sewing, become especially visible archaeologically later in the Upper Paleolithic. But that does not mean earlier people lacked ways to join material. An awl and cord can accomplish a great deal. Again, the absence of a later tool does not mean the absence of the problem-solving that preceded it. You watch the edges come together. The result fits more closely than a loose wrap. That matters. Loose material allows wind inside. Fitted clothing traps warm air near the body in colder climates. Small improvements can create large differences. This may have influenced where humans could live. As populations expanded through Eurasia, clothing technology would have become increasingly important. A person adapted biologically to warm climates cannot wait thousands of generations for evolution to provide a fur coat. Culture moves faster. A hide garment can be made within days, a better shelter within hours. Fire can be carried or recreated. Technology allows the body to enter environments it was not originally built to tolerate. You look beyond the fire. The sky is darkening. The first stars appear. Somewhere far to the north, landscapes are colder still. Neanderthals have already been surviving such conditions for immense stretches of time. Homo sapiens entering similar regions would need comparable practical solutions. How clothing traditions differed between these populations remains difficult to know. Stone tools used for hideworking provide clues. So do skeletal adaptations, settlement patterns, and the simple fact that cold environments impose unavoidable demands. But whether one group regularly wore fitted garments while another preferred different constructions cannot be read clearly from scattered artifacts. The garments themselves are mostly gone. You're watching something archaeology desperately wishes it could preserve. Someone hands a piece of cord to another person. The cord catches your attention. It is twisted. Fibers have been combined into a stronger line. Cordage may seem unimpressive in a modern world full of manufactured rope, elastic, wire, and synthetic thread. Here, it can transform daily life. Cord ties clothing, binds tools, secures loads, holds shelters together, carries children, creates nets or bags. Supports traps. A simple length of fiber can become an invisible foundation of technology. There are rare prehistoric finds showing that humans and other ancient human populations understood twisted fibers surprisingly early. Such discoveries force you to imagine all the cord that did not survive. One preserved fragment may represent millions of vanished meters. You begin to look around the camp differently. That bundle near the wall may have been tied. The spear point was bound. The hide is joined. The container may be woven. The shelter covering needs securing. Flexible materials connect everything. Stone makes the sharp edge. Fiber makes the system hold together. The night becomes colder. People begin settling closer to the fire. Bedding is arranged. A hide is shaken out. Dust rises briefly and catches the firelight. Several people lie close together. Children are positioned between adults. You find a place near the shelter wall. The stone behind you is cool. A hide is placed beneath part of your body. Another covering rests over you. The difference is immediate, not perfect, but significant. You understand how easy it is, from the comfort of the future, to underestimate the importance of these materials. Clothing rarely appears in dramatic prehistoric illustrations unless it is being used to make the people look prehistoric. Here, it is not costume, it is survival technology. The fire settles lower. Someone adjusts the covering around a sleeping child. Another person pulls material over their legs. The sounds of the camp soften. Wind continues outside. You can hear it moving through the vegetation inside the shelter. Warmth is held in small pockets, between bodies, beneath hides, near embers, behind stone. You close your eyes for a moment. The material over you smells faintly of smoke. It is heavier than a modern blanket, rougher too. But tonight, you appreciate it. And you begin to understand how much of human history may have been made from things that vanished. Stone survives to tell you people were here. Clothing tells you how they managed to remain. even when almost none of it is left to say so. Morning begins with children already awake. You hear them before you properly open your eyes, a quick laugh, a whispered exchange, the scrape of a small object across the ground. The fire has not yet been fully revived, and the shelter remains dim. For a moment, the adult seems slower than the children, that part at least. Feels familiar. You sit up beneath the hide covering from last night. The air outside is pale and cold. One child is crouched near a scatter of stones, arranging them into a rough line. Another holds a short stick and copies the movements of an adult who is working near the entrance. No formal lesson has begun. There is no teacher standing in front of a group, no schedule, no written instructions. And yet learning is happening everywhere. That becomes the focus of your day in a mobile hunter-gatherer community. Children have to acquire an extraordinary amount of practical knowledge before adulthood. They must learn landscapes, plants, animals, weather, tools, fire, social rules, danger, food sharing, movement, relationships, and perhaps most importantly, they must learn how to learn from other people. You watch a young child approach the fire. An adult reaches out without looking and guides them slightly to the side. The correction is gentle, quick, almost automatic. The child changes direction. No lecture follows. A few minutes later, the same child returns carrying a small piece of wood and places it near the edge of the hearth. This time, nobody stops them. Participation has begun. Human childhood is unusually long compared with that of many other mammals. That extended period of development gives children time to acquire complex skills, language, social expectations, and local knowledge. By the time Homo sapiens were living 60,000 years ago, this long developmental pattern was already deeply rooted in our species. A child here is not simply waiting to become useful. The child is gradually becoming competent through years of observation and practice. You step outside. Several older children are following adults away from the shelter. You join them. The pace is slower than on the hunting trip. Today feels more like instruction through ordinary movement. One adult pauses beside a plant. A child immediately crouches. The adult touches the leaves, then points toward the base. The child digs with a small stick. The first attempt misses the root. The adult points again. The second attempt is better. There is your classroom. Soil, plant, gesture, repetition. You wonder how many times the child has already seen this. Dozens, hundreds. Perhaps the lesson is not new at all. Perhaps today is simply another layer. Farther along, another child notices tracks. They call softly to an older person. The adult comes closer. The child points. The adult examines the marks, then gestures in another direction. The child looks again. You cannot understand the words, but the structure of the exchange is clear. Observation is being corrected. That correction matters. Recognizing tracks incorrectly is harmless during play. Later, it could waste hours or create danger. Skill grows because mistakes happen when stakes are still low. The group continues. One child wanders from the route to investigate an insect. Nobody immediately pulls them back. Another child follows. They crouch together, completely absorbed, for several minutes. The prehistoric survival curriculum appears to consist entirely of beetle inspection. You approve, play matters too. Among modern hunter-gatherer communities, children often learn through self-directed play, imitation, mixed-age groups, and participation in daily tasks rather than through constant formal instruction. You cannot simply assume every detail of living groups applies unchanged to people 60,000 years ago. But the pattern makes evolutionary sense. Children learn well by doing, and this world offers endless opportunities to do. You reach a shallow stream. The children spread out. One adult begins collecting something from the edge. A child imitates the motion. Another fills a small container badly and spills most of it. Nobody reacts as if civilization has collapsed. The child tries again. You begin to appreciate the patience required to maintain knowledge across generations. A skilled adult can make a task look effortless, but every expert once dropped things, misidentified things, broke things, forgot things, walked the wrong way. Children carry the future of the group, but they arrive without the group's accumulated experience. Every generation has to transfer that knowledge again. Speech probably plays a major role. Exactly what language sounded like here is inaccessible to you. But the complexity of social life around you would be difficult to sustain without rich communication. Names for plants, places, people, actions, warnings, stories, plans, instructions, perhaps categories for animals and seasons. Perhaps kin relationships more complicated than anything you could guess by watching. Language turns individual experience into shared knowledge. A person who discovers water does not have to wait for everyone else to discover it independently. They can tell others. A hunter can describe what happened beyond the ridge. A child can be warned about danger before personally learning why it is dangerous. That ability changes the economics of survival. Experience becomes transferable. You return toward camp around midday, near the shelter. Older children are helping with tools. One sits beside an adult who is working stone. The child holds a rough piece and strikes it carefully. The flake comes off badly. The adult takes the stone, turns it, points to a different edge, hands it back. Another attempt. Better. The lesson lasts less than a minute. Then the adult returns to their own work. There is no praise speech, no certificate. The child simply keeps practicing. Archaeological sites occasionally preserve clusters of stone flakes that appear less skillfully produced than others. Some specialists have wondered whether certain awkwardly struck pieces may represent learners practicing beside experienced nappers. Proving that interpretation is difficult, a poorly made flake could result from bad raw material, hurried work, or many other causes. Still, the possibility is irresistible. A clumsy strike preserved for tens of thousands of years might be the fingerprint of a child learning a craft. You look at the scatter beneath your feet. Suddenly the mistakes feel important. Perfect tools show expertise. Bad ones may show education. Later, food is prepared. Children participate again. One carries plant material. Another watches closely while an adult processes a root. A younger child receives a small portion before the rest is divided. Older people are nearby. No one belongs to a single, isolated parent-child unit in the way modern households are often imagined. Care appears distributed. Someone unrelated biologically may watch a child for a while. An older sibling may help. Grandparents or other kin may contribute knowledge and support. Human survival has long depended on cooperative care. This has led some anthropologists to emphasize the importance of alloparenting, care given by individuals other than the biological mother. In human evolution, the precise arrangements here are invisible to you. You do not know who is aunt, uncle, cousin, grandmother, friend, or unrelated companion. But children move through a web of adults. That web matters. Raising a human child is expensive in time and energy. Human children remain dependent for years. Mothers may also have additional children before earlier ones are fully independent. Support from others can make that burden more manageable. You watch an older child carry a younger one for a short distance. There is nothing remarkable about the action. Perhaps that is the point. Care is woven into the day. As afternoon cools, several children begin playing near the edge of camp. One throws a small stick, another runs after it. A third imitates stalking behavior through the grass, crouching far more dramatically than any adult hunter you followed. You recognize the pattern immediately. Play rehearses adult skills, throwing, tracking, hiding, cooperation, competition, pretending. The line between entertainment and training is blurry. A child does not need to announce, "I am now practicing for subsistence competence." They are simply playing. Future skill grows inside present enjoyment. There may also be songs, rhythms, stories, games of sound and movement. These leave almost nothing behind. You can imagine them, but not recover them with confidence. That absence matters. Prehistoric childhood is not only what children learn to survive, it is also what made them laugh, what frightened them, which stories they requested again, what games older children taught younger ones, which adult they preferred to follow, which sibling annoyed them. None of that fossilizes. Evening returns. The children become quieter as food is shared. One falls asleep early beside the fire, another continues watching an adult repair a tool long after you would expect them to lose interest. You sit near the shelter wall. The day has changed your sense of prehistoric knowledge. Yesterday, tools seemed like knowledge made visible. Today, you see the next step. Knowledge has to move, from hand to hand, voice to ear, adult to child, older child to younger child. Mistake to correction, game to skill, memory to memory. Without that transfer, even the best technology disappears within a generation. The fire brightens as darkness settles outside. A child leans against an older person. Someone begins speaking. Others listen. You do not know whether it is instruction, gossip, memory, or story. Perhaps all four can live in the same conversation. And as the voices continue beneath the stone shelter, you realize that the most important inheritance in this world cannot be buried. It has to be taught. The smoke you saw beyond the ridge yesterday is still in your mind, not because it looked threatening. It did not. It was simply distant. A faint grey line rising into the sky where another group of people might be living this morning. The camp feels unusually attentive. Several adults speak quietly near the fire. A few tools are packed. Food is gathered into portable bundles. Children are told through gesture and tone to remain close. You cannot understand the words, but you can feel that something has changed. Today, you're walking toward other people. The route begins along familiar ground. You pass the same slope where animal tracks crossed soft soil. You recognize the stand of trees near the water source. Already, the landscape feels less anonymous than it did several days ago. Then the group turns in a direction you have not traveled before. The terrain becomes rockier. A narrow valley opens ahead. The people around you move with confidence. That tells you they have been here before. Human groups living 60,000 years ago were not necessarily isolated bands drifting through endless emptiness. They could maintain relationships across substantial distances. People may have met seasonally. Partners may have moved between communities. Stone, shells, pigments, tools, stories, techniques, and news could travel far beyond the camp where they began. A group might spend much of the year apart from others and still remain part of a larger social world. You begin to understand why that matters. A small group cannot solve every problem alone. Too few potential partners can create difficulties across generations. A shortage of food in one territory may be easier to survive if relationships exist elsewhere. A useful technique invented by one group can become more valuable if it spreads information about water. Animals, storms, or dangerous places can move through conversation. Social connections are practical, but they are probably more than practical too. People seek one another because humans are social. You walk for several hours. The sun rises higher. The valley narrows. A bird circles overhead. Then one person at the front of the group stops. Everyone slows. You hear voices. Not your group. Distant at first, then clearer. The reaction around you is cautious but not alarmed. One person calls out. A reply comes from beyond a low ridge. You feel an unexpected tension in your stomach. You have spent days surrounded by unfamiliar people, yet they have become familiar to you. Now you are about to meet strangers from 60,000 years ago. Several figures appear. They stop at a distance. For a moment, both groups simply look at one another. Then something in posture changes. Shoulders relax. Someone raises a hand. Another person approaches. The first meeting does not become a dramatic confrontation. No weapons are lifted. No one rushes forward. Instead, people close this distance gradually. Voices overlap. A few individuals touch shoulders or arms. One person laughs. A child peers from behind an adult. Whatever relationship exists here, this does not appear to be the first encounter. You follow the group into a nearby open area. The second community is similar in size to the one you know. Their clothing looks familiar, though not identical. Some tools differ slightly. You notice a particular style of stone point that you have not seen at your camp. Another person wears several small objects around the neck, shells, or perhaps pierced teeth. They catch the light. That detail immediately changes the feeling of the meeting. Objects can travel. A shell worn far inland might have passed through several hands before reaching this person. It could have arrived as a gift, exchange, adornment brought by someone who once lived near the coast, or through a sequence of relationships stretching across regions no single person regularly travels in full. Material can move farther than people do. This is one reason prehistoric exchange is so fascinating. A stone source might lie many days away from where archaeologists eventually find the finished tool. That distance does not automatically mean one person walked the entire route. Objects can circulate through social networks. The same could be true of ideas, a new binding method, a particular way to shape a point, knowledge of an edible plant, a story, a song, even a style of decoration. You sit near the edge of the gathering. Food is brought out. People from both groups begin sharing portions. Children approach one another cautiously. For a while they stay close to familiar adults. Then curiosity wins. Two older children begin examining a small tool. Another group forms around some stones near the ground. Within a short time, they are playing. Language differences, if any exist, do not appear to stop them. You listen closely to the adults. The speech sounds different from what you've heard at your shelter. Perhaps it truly is a different dialect or language. Perhaps your untrained ear is imagining variation. There is no recording to preserve the answer. If neighbouring communities spoke differently, communication might depend on multilingual individuals, shared vocabulary, gesture, or repeated contact. The linguistic map of the Pleistocene is almost entirely invisible. Tens of thousands of languages may have emerged and disappeared without leaving so much as a syllable behind. You watch one person from your camp speak with someone from the other group for a long time. They point in different directions. One traces a line in the soil, another responds. Perhaps they are discussing animal movement, perhaps a water source, perhaps a route, perhaps something entirely social. The meaning is lost to you. The exchange itself is not. Information is moving. Later, several objects are placed between people. A stone core, a bundle of plant material, a small ornament. Nobody seems to be counting in the precise way you might expect in a market. That does not mean exchange is casual. Gifts can create obligations. Sharing can reinforce relationships. An object may carry memory or status as well as practical value. The social meaning behind prehistoric exchange is harder to recover than the movement of the material itself. A piece of stone can be chemically matched to its geological source. The joke told while it was handed over is gone forever. One of the adults from the other group examines a point from your camp. They turn it in the light, run a finger near the edge, then show it to someone else. The gesture reminds you of yesterday's lesson. Technology can spread through observation. A person does not need written diagrams. They can watch, ask, imitate, carry the technique home. This matters on a much larger scale. Human populations survive not only through individual intelligence, but through cumulative culture. One generation inherits solutions from another. Neighbouring groups can expand that pool of knowledge further when populations are connected. Useful ideas have more pathways along which to travel. When groups become isolated, some knowledge can disappear. The relationship between population size, connectivity, and technological change remains complicated, and no single formula explains every region. Still, social networks clearly matter. You can see why, simply by sitting here. One camp knows something the other may not. One group has access to certain stone, another knows a route, Another person has relatives somewhere beyond both territories. Connections reduce the size of the world. Afternoon light spreads across the meeting place. Several adults have moved aside in pairs. One interaction catches your attention. A younger adult from your group sits close to someone from the other community. Their conversation is quiet. Their body language is relaxed. You begin to wonder whether partnerships between groups are part of these meetings. They almost certainly could be. Movement of mates between communities helps maintain broader genetic connections. A person might leave the group where they were born and join another. That would carry more than genes. It would carry knowledge, habits, stories, tool traditions, memories of landscapes elsewhere. A single marriage or partnership can become a bridge between communities. You think about genetic evidence from the distant future. Population histories often preserve signals of mixture and separation. Those patterns look abstract when displayed as charts. Here, they would have been personal. Someone leaves one fire and begins sleeping beside another. A child grows up knowing relatives in two places. A visitor brings a technique learned far away. Large population patterns are made from intimate decisions. The gathering continues until shadows lengthen. Then people begin preparing to separate. There is no sense of finality. This feels temporary. The groups expect to encounter one another again. Food is redistributed. Several objects change hands. One child protests when another group begins leaving. An adult gently redirects them. You smile. Social inconvenience has survived 60,000 years too. The return journey begins. Your group carries a few things it did not have this morning. One person has a different piece of stone. Another carries plant material. Someone wears a small ornament that belonged to no one at your shelter yesterday. But the most valuable things being carried are invisible. News, directions, relationships, perhaps promises, perhaps warnings, perhaps future plans. You cross the ridge as evening approaches. Behind you, the second group disappears from sight, yet they no longer feel distant. You understand now that a prehistoric camp is not a sealed world. Invisible connections stretch outward, to relatives, partners, allies, visitors, people known only through other people, even strangers who may someday become kin. When your shelter finally appears, smoke rises from the familiar hearth. Those who remained behind come forward. Conversation starts immediately. The meeting is retold, objects are shown, information spreads. You sit near the fire as darkness arrives. A new stone rests beside an old one. Two pieces from different places now share the same ground. Tomorrow they may become tools. Years from now, perhaps someone will carry one farther still, and 60,000 years later, a fragment may remain in the soil, quietly revealing that these people were never as isolated as they once seemed. The next journey takes you farther than usual by now. The familiar shelter has begun to feel like an anchor. You know where the fire is kept. You recognize the path toward water. You know which stretch of ground becomes cold first or after sunset. So when the group leaves before sunrise and continues beyond the routes you have already walked, you feel the distance more clearly. The landscape changes gradually. Open ground gives way to rougher country. Vegetation thins in places. The air feels cooler. The people around you do not seem concerned, but they are more attentive. Several carry hunting weapons. Others keep children close. You follow quietly. For hours, nothing unusual appears. Then someone stops. Not because of an animal, because of a footprint. You crouch beside it. Human, at least. That is what it looks like. But the group studies it longer than you expect. A second print appears nearby. Then another. The reactions are difficult to read. Recognition, caution, interest. No panic. The tracks continue across softer ground and disappear among stones. You stand. The thought settles slowly. Someone else is moving through this landscape, and they may not belong to Homo sapiens. 60,000 years ago, Eurasia is not home to one surviving kind of human. Neanderthals occupy broad regions of Europe and Western Asia. farther east. Denisovan ancestry tells of another population whose physical world remains much less visible. There may also have been other groups whose names, bodies, and histories are now represented only by faint genetic traces or not preserved at all. The human family is still crowded. You continue walking. The word Neanderthal probably brings an image to mind. Heavy brow, stocky body. Perhaps someone crouched awkwardly in a cave looking permanently confused. That old stereotype has aged badly. Neanderthals made sophisticated stone tools. They used fire. They hunted large animals. They adapted to demanding climates. Some individuals survived injuries severe enough to imply long-term care from others. Evidence from sites associated with them has also raised questions about pigments, ornaments, feathers, adhesives, burial practices, and other behaviours once too casually treated as uniquely modern human. The differences between populations were real, but the old ladder with Neanderthals below and Homo sapiens neatly above is much harder to defend. Human evolution looks more like a branching thicket, and some of those branches touched. The group crosses a narrow drainage, near a rocky wall. One hunter signals everyone to slow. There are marks on the ground. Then you smell it. Smoke. Very faint. Not fresh enough to see immediately. A little farther ahead. A darkened patch of earth appears beneath an overhang. Someone has used fire here. Charcoal remains. Ash. A few stone fragments. The place is empty now. Your companions inspect it carefully. You look around and wonder who sat here. Another Homo sapiens group, Neanderthals people, whose identity could not be recognized from a campsite without detailed analysis to you. The shelter feels frustratingly anonymous. Stone does not introduce itself. A hearth does not preserve the voice of the person who built it. Even tools can mislead if styles overlap or technologies move between populations. Future archaeologists sometimes use combinations of anatomy, dated layers, tool traditions, proteins, and ancient DNA to connect remains with particular human groups, but deep prehistory rarely provides perfect labels. You sit near this old hearth. Someone picks up a flake, turns it, places it back. No one seems shocked by the existence of other people here. That may be the most important clue of all. Perhaps encounters are expected. Perhaps territories overlap. Perhaps the group knows exactly who used this place. You simply do not have the vocabulary to ask. The journey continues. By midday, you reach colder ground. Wind moves strongly between rocky slopes. The people pull hides closer around their bodies. You think about Neanderthals living through glacial Eurasia. Their bodies tended to be robust, with broad trunks and relatively shorter lower limbs compared with many recent human populations, traits often discussed in relation to conserving heat. But biology alone did not carry them through cold climates. They needed shelter, fire, clothing or body coverings of some kind, knowledge of animals, tools, social cooperation. Cold does not care what species name future scientists give you. It requires solutions. A little later, movement appears above the valley floor, several figures far away. Your group stops immediately. You narrow your eyes. The people across the distance are difficult to see clearly. Their bodies appear broad. Clothing hides much of their form. One carries something long, a spear, perhaps, for several breaths. Both groups remain still. No one advances. No one flees. You hear only wind. This is the kind of moment that tempts the future to invent certainty. A meeting between different human populations feels as though it should become a dramatic story. Conflict, friendship, exchange, fear. Yet the honest answer may be simpler. You cannot know. Some encounters were probably peaceful. Others may not have been. Some populations lived near one another for thousands of years, which leaves room for every kind of human interaction imaginable. Genetics provides one fact that the silence cannot erase. Interbreeding occurred. Many living people with ancestry outside sub-Saharan Africa carry roughly a small percentage of Neanderthal-derived DNA. Denisovan ancestry survives at particularly notable levels among some populations in Oceania and is also found in varying amounts across parts of Asia. Those genetic fragments are remnants of meetings between populations that had been separated for long evolutionary periods. You look toward the distant figures again. A percentage on a modern genetics report suddenly feels very intimate. It once meant people, two individuals close enough to speak, touch, share food, travel together, raise children. The exact social circumstances are lost. DNA preserves ancestry, not memory. The figures begin moving, not toward you, across the slope. Your group watches. One adult beside you makes a low comment. Another responds. Then your people continue along their own route. No confrontation. No grand encounter, just two groups passing within sight of each other. You almost feel disappointed. Then you realize how modern that reaction is. You expected history to perform for you. History is under no obligation to be cinematic. Perhaps this sort of distant sighting happened repeatedly. Perhaps people avoided unfamiliar groups unless there was a reason to approach. Perhaps some communities maintained established relationships across population boundaries. There is no single model that can cover thousands of years and enormous regions. Contact could vary by place, climate, population density, resource pressure, and individual relationships. Even the timing of interbreeding was not one isolated event. Genetic studies indicate multiple episodes of contact between different ancient human populations. Neanderthals and Denisovans themselves interbred. A remarkable individual discovered through DNA from Denisova Cave had a Neanderthal mother and a Denisovan father. The finding is almost absurdly personal for such a distant age. Not a statistical trace, not a vague percentage. One person whose parents came from two distinct ancient human populations. You imagine that individual as a child. Someone carried them, fed them, corrected their mistakes, perhaps laughed when they did something foolish. The categories that modern textbooks separate into boxes once existed inside families. That thought stays with you. The afternoon passes, you find more signs of human presence. Worked stone, a place where material has been broken. Old charcoal. None can be confidently assigned from appearance alone. The farther you travel, the less useful simple labels become. Homo sapiens, Neanderthal, Denisovan. Biologically meaningful distinctions. Yes, but lived experience would have been messier. People met individuals, not species diagrams. Language may have differed. Appearance may have mattered. Customs certainly varied. But familiarity changes perception. A strange group seen once might be frightening. A neighbouring community encountered over generations might be simply known. You turn back toward familiar territory. The wind is behind you now. Walking feels easier. Children become louder as the tension of the unfamiliar landscape fades. Someone finds edible material along the route and collects it. Daily life slips back into place. That is another correction to the dramatic picture. Even in a world containing several human lineages, people still have to think about dinner. The fire at your shelter is visible near dusk. Its smoke rises straight into calm air. You feel unexpectedly relieved. The familiar faces around camp seem more significant after seeing distant strangers. Food is shared. Tools are placed down. One hunter describes something using gestures toward the hills. Others listen carefully. Perhaps the distant people are being discussed. Perhaps tomorrow's route. Perhaps both. You sit near the flames. The firelight touches hands, faces, stone, hide, far beyond this camp. Another fire may be burning. Around it sit people who look somewhat different. People with their own knowledge, children, memories, roots, stories. Some of their descendants will disappear as distinct populations, but not entirely. Pieces of them will remain inside others. You watch sparks rise into darkness. The human world of 60,000 years ago is becoming stranger the closer you look. Not because its people are less human, because there are more ways to be human here than your own age remembers. The next day, colour enters the story. Until now, most of the world around you has been earth, hide, stone, smoke, wood, and fire. Muted colours: brown, grey, black, dusty green. Then someone opens a small container near the shelter and reveals something brighter. Red, not painted across a wall, not arranged in a grand ceremonial display. Just a lump of ochre resting in the palm of a hand. You lean closer. The colour is deep and warm, almost rusty. Someone rubs the material against stone. A fine powder gathers. Another person mixes it with something, perhaps fat, perhaps water, perhaps another binding substance. The exact recipe is not clear, but the result becomes smoother, more usable, pigment. You have entered one of the most difficult parts of deep prehistory. Meaning? Stone tools can tell you what people cut. Animal bones can hint at what they ate. Hearths show where fires burned. Pigment asks a much more uncomfortable question. Why? Ochre was used by humans long before 60,000 years ago. Pieces bearing scraping, grinding, or deliberate marks have been found at African sites from periods much older than the camp you're visiting. Some were processed repeatedly. That alone tells you the material mattered. But importance is not the same thing as explanation. Ochre has practical uses. It can help treat hides. It may contribute to adhesives. It can protect surfaces. Mixed with other materials, it can become part of technological processes. It can also colour skin, objects, clothing, or other surfaces. A single red fragment therefore refuses to tell you which role it played. You watch someone apply pigment to a small object. The motion is careful, not rushed. The object may be bone or stone. You cannot see clearly from where you sit. Another person has colour on the skin near the face. That catches your attention. Decoration, identity ritual. Protection. A normal habit with no sacred meaning at all. You immediately begin supplying explanations because that is what people from your world like to do. The people here supply none. They simply continue. A child reaches toward the ochre. An adult allows a small amount to be touched. Red powder stains the fingertips. The child looks delighted. You smile. Whatever deeper meanings colour may carry. Apparently it can also be interesting because it gets everywhere. Some experiences survive time quite well. You follow several people toward a shaded area beside the rock wall. There, another object is being worked. A shell, small, pierced. You have seen similar ornaments during the meeting with the neighbouring group. Now you can watch one being handled closely. The hole is deliberate, cord passes through it. Several shells can be worn together. Their value is not nutritional. They do not cut. They do not dig. They do not keep anyone warm. And yet time and effort have been spent collecting, piercing, transporting, and arranging them. That makes them unusually revealing. Humans are doing something beyond immediate survival. They are making appearance matter. Perhaps the shells show group identity. Perhaps they mark age, relationship, status, personal taste. Perhaps they are simply beautiful. Modern people sometimes become uncomfortable with that last possibility because it sounds too ordinary. But ordinary preference is still human behaviour. A person 60,000 years ago may have liked the way a shell caught the light. Not every ornament needs a secret religion attached to it. Still, the repeated use of pigments, beads, engraved objects, and other non-utilitarian materials across prehistoric sites suggests that symbolic behaviour was already deeply important in many human communities. Objects could carry meanings that existed only because people agreed on them. That is a powerful ability. A shell can become more than shell. A colour can become more than mineral. A pattern can refer to something absent. A mark can belong to a person, group, memory, or idea. Symbolic thought transforms the visible world. You sit near the wall and watch someone draw a short line through red pigment spread on a flat surface, then another. The marks form a pattern, simple, repeated. You recognize nothing, No animal, no face, no obvious map, just lines. That may be the point where your confidence fails completely. A repeated geometric mark could be decoration, counting, ownership, memory, play, a teaching exercise, a symbol whose meaning was obvious to everyone here and impossible to anyone outside the culture. The mark survives. The explanation does not. Even much later, prehistoric art creates this problem. A painted animal on a cave wall looks meaningful because someone invested effort in making it. But whether it relates to ritual, storytelling, hunting beliefs, teaching, identity, altered states, memory, or aesthetics can remain uncertain. At 60,000 years ago, the interpretive distance is even greater. You're not merely missing a dictionary, you're missing the entire cultural world in which the symbols made sense. Someone hands a shell ornament to another person. The recipient smiles. A relationship is visible. The meaning of the object may be contained inside that relationship. Gift, promise, recognition, memory. You cannot know which. That does not make the act empty. Quite the opposite. It reminds you how little of human life can be reduced to function. Yesterday, you saw distant evidence of relationships between different human populations. Today, you see relationships encoded in objects much smaller than a hand. A bead can travel. A pigment tradition can spread. A style can identify people at distance. Adornment can turn the body itself into a surface for communication, long before writing. Appearance may already carry information. You look again at the person with pigment near the face. Perhaps others immediately understand something that you do not. You understand only colour. They may understand belonging. The afternoon becomes warmer. A few people retreat deeper into shade. Someone grinds more ochre. The scraping sound is soft. Fine red dust gathers in a depression in the stone. You notice that processing pigment takes time that could be spent doing something else. That choice matters. Human communities do not spend effort only on calories. They invest in things that reinforce social life, decoration, ritual, games, music, storytelling, body care, shared identity. None of these can be dismissed as luxuries simply because they do not directly produce food. Social cohesion itself can affect survival. Belonging matters. Trust matters. Knowing who is friend, relative, partner, or outsider matters. Symbolic objects may participate in these systems, or some may simply make life more interesting. Both possibilities can be true at once. A sound draws your attention. Rhythmic tapping. Not stone napping this time. Someone is striking two objects together in a repeated pattern. A child joins by clapping. Another person vocalizes briefly. You cannot know whether this is music in the sense you would recognize or just play, but rhythm appears naturally. Human voices can repeat patterns. Hands can clap. Sticks can strike surfaces. Feet can stamp. Almost none of that leaves archaeological evidence. The absence is enormous. If singing is already part of life here, the entire musical world will vanish without a trace. No melody fossilizes. No chorus remains in sediment. You listen carefully anyway. The rhythm stops after a minute. Conversation resumes. That tiny episode may be culturally meaningless, or it may belong to a tradition older than anyone in camp can remember. You will never know. As evening approaches, pigment appears again. This time, a person marks a strip of hide. The line is short, then another is added beside it. The finished pattern is modest. No masterpiece. No cave ceiling covered in animals. Just decoration on something meant to be worn or carried. That small act feels more revealing than a dramatic painting might. It shows that visual choices can live inside daily life. Symbolism does not need a temple. Beauty does not need civilization. A person can decorate a useful object simply because usefulness and meaning are not opposites. The fire is lit more strongly as the air cools. Red pigment glows differently in firelight. Shell ornaments flicker pale against skin. The people around you begin settling into evening routines: food, children, tool repair, conversation. Nothing about the day is presented as special, and that is what stays with you. You once imagined symbolic behavior as a milestone, a moment when humans suddenly became modern. Standing here, it feels less like a switch and more like a long accumulation. Marks, colours, objects, gestures, shared meanings, some ancient, some new, some practical, some personal, some impossible to classify. You look at your own fingertips. A faint trace of ochre remains from when you touched the pigment earlier. Red dust, mineral, colour, meaning. Perhaps, or perhaps simply a stain. The uncertainty does not make the world smaller, it makes it deeper, because somewhere inside these marks are thoughts that once made perfect sense, and tonight, beside the fire, you can see their traces without ever hearing their explanation. Night arrives earlier than you expect. The last light slips away from the open ground beyond the shelter, and the world contracts around the fire. During the day, distance feels measurable. You can see ridges, trees, water, tracks, smoke from another camp. At night, nearly all of that disappears. The fire becomes the center. People move closer. Children settle beside adults. Tools are placed within reach. Food is divided. The temperature drops, and then voices begin. You have heard conversation every day since arriving here. Instructions, warnings, comments, laughter, exchanges whose meaning you cannot follow. Tonight feels different. Someone speaks for longer, others listen. The rhythm is slower. There are pauses. A hand gestures toward the darkness beyond the shelter. Another person responds. A child interrupts. Several adults laugh. Then the speaker continues. You begin to wonder whether you are listening to a story. That word may be too simple. It could be a memory, a warning, an account of a journey, a description of animals, a tale involving ancestors, a lesson hidden inside entertainment, perhaps several of those things at once. Without writing, information does not disappear automatically. It can live in people, repeated, remembered, corrected, retold. The fire crackles. Someone adds a branch. Sparks rise briefly and vanish. You sit quietly and listen to words that will never be written down. By 60,000 years ago, Homo sapiens were living in social worlds complex enough to require constant communication. People coordinated hunting, shared knowledge of landscapes, maintained relationships across groups, raised children who needed years of instruction, managed alliances, partnerships, obligations, and disputes. Whatever the exact form of language at this time, human communication had to support far more than simple calls. You can see that from daily life alone. A hunter needs to describe what lies beyond the ridge. A gatherer needs to explain where a plant grows. Someone joining another group needs to learn names and relationships. Children need correction. Adults need planning. A social world this complicated cannot function on pointing alone. You watch the speaker change tone. The children become more attentive. Perhaps this is the part they know. One child anticipates a gesture and smiles before it happens. That small reaction tells you something important. The words may have been heard before. Repetition creates memory. A story told many times becomes easier to preserve. Certain phrases may remain stable. Key events may always appear in the same order. Songs or rhythmic passages could make remembering easier still. Oral traditions in much later societies have sometimes preserved genealogies, roots, ecological knowledge, laws, ritual material, and accounts of past events across impressive spans of time. That does not mean you can project any one later tradition unchanged into this camp. But memory does not begin with writing. People had long needed ways to keep important information alive. You look around the fire. Every adult here carries a library that burns when the person dies unless someone else has learned enough of it. That makes teaching urgent. It also makes repetition valuable. Perhaps the same tale is told every season. Perhaps children learn it before understanding why it matters. Perhaps a place name contains a warning. Perhaps an animal story preserves real observations about migration. You cannot separate imagination from practical knowledge because the people here may not separate them either. A story can entertain and instruct at the same time. Modern life does this too. You simply hide the lesson inside different packaging and occasionally add a subscription fee. The speaker stops. Another person begins. This voice is older, slower. A hand points toward the rock wall behind the fire, then toward the sky. You notice several people glance upward. You follow their gaze. Stars. Thousands of them, without artificial light. The sky is overwhelming. The Milky Way stretches across the darkness in a broad pale band. You understand immediately why the heavens might become part of memory. Stars move predictably. Certain constellations appear in certain seasons. The moon changes shape. Sunrise shifts along the horizon through the year. People who spend their lives outdoors would notice these patterns. Whether they encoded them into stories, ritual, navigation, seasonal planning, or all of these in some places is far harder to recover. But the sky is not background here. It is a clock of sorts, a calendar without numbers, a repeating pattern overhead. A person can learn when certain stars rise, when nights lengthen, when seasonal changes tend to follow. You think of the route to water, the timing of fruit, animal migrations, rainfall. All of these are connected to cycles. Memory makes those cycles useful. A child asks something. The older speaker responds with a gesture toward the horizon. Perhaps the explanation involves a place. Perhaps the stars. Perhaps you're inventing meaning where none exists. That is the danger of looking this far back. You want every gesture to become evidence, every object to become symbol, every pause to become ritual. Sometimes a person may simply be pointing at something. The gap between observation and interpretation is enormous. You have to live with that. The fire lowers. Someone begins humming, very softly. Another voice joins for a few moments. The sound is simple. No instrument accompanies it. No clear rhythm continues long enough for you to memorize. Then it stops. You find yourself thinking about music again. The human voice leaves no fossil. A song can fill a shelter every night for generations and disappear completely when the last person who knows it dies. Bone flutes survive from later Upper Paleolithic contexts, showing that formal musical instruments eventually became part of prehistoric life. But music itself is older than any surviving instrument could prove. Hands can clap, voices can sing, feet can stamp, sticks can strike wood. The oldest melody may be far older than the oldest object capable of preserving its existence. You hear a child quietly repeating a few sounds after an adult. Practice. Perhaps a song. Perhaps a phrase. Perhaps a name. Language is moving again. You begin to notice how much social life depends on memory without leaving physical remains. Who owes food to whom? Who can marry whom? Which person belongs to which family? Who knows a distant group where someone was born? Who once survived a dangerous journey? Which water source failed during a dry year? What happened when animals disappeared from a valley? These details can affect real decisions. None needs writing to matter. A group may also remember people who are dead. That possibility feels almost unavoidable. Children hear names of relatives they never met. Adults recall someone who taught them a skill. A tool may have belonged to another person. A place may carry association. Memory allows absent people to remain socially present. How far back genealogical knowledge could extend in communities like this is unknowable. Perhaps only a few generations were remembered clearly. Perhaps important lineages lasted longer. Perhaps stories blended actual ancestors with mythic figures until the difference no longer mattered. Deep memory changes as it travels. Modern historians struggle with written sources that contradict one another after a few centuries. Expecting perfect verbal preservation across millennia would be generous, but perfect accuracy is not required for memory to shape identity. A story can change and still matter. The older speaker finishes. People begin moving. A child is carried toward a sleeping place. Someone checks the edge of the fire. Another person arranges hides. You think the night's storytelling is over. Then a younger adult begins speaking to two children nearby. Short sentences this time, repeated. The children answer together. You smile. Maybe this is instruction. Maybe a game. Maybe both. The boundary keeps disappearing. You settle against the stone wall. The rock is cool through your covering. Firelight moves across the ceiling. Voices continue around you. You cannot understand their vocabulary, but you understand the function more clearly now. Speech does what stone cannot. It carries things that have no physical shape. Tomorrow's plan, yesterday's mistake. A person's name, a joke, a warning, a promise, a memory of rain, a story about another group, a song associated with a child, a place nobody in camp can currently see. Words allow the absent to enter the present. That may be one of humanity's most powerful technologies. No sharp edge, no wooden shaft, no cord, nothing you can hold. Yet language can guide a person toward water they have never visited. It can teach them to avoid a poisonous plant they have never tasted. It can tell a child who their relatives are. It can preserve the experience of someone already dead. The fire collapses slightly. A glowing branch breaks and settles into the embers. The shelter becomes quieter. Outside, the sky remains enormous. You listen to the last fragments of conversation. Soon they fade too. And for the first time, you understand why the silence of deep prehistory feels so misleading. These people were not silent. They lived inside worlds of voices. It is only the future that can no longer hear them. The morning air feels different, cooler, drier. The sky is clear, but the people around the shelter are paying close attention to it. One person studies the horizon, another checks the ground near the water containers, a third speaks with someone who has just returned from farther out. Nothing dramatic has happened. Still, you sense uncertainty. The season is shifting. You have already learned that this world is never static for long. Around 60,000 years ago, the planet was deep within the Pleistocene, an age marked by repeated swings between colder and warmer conditions. Ice sheets expanded and retreated across parts of the northern hemisphere. Rainfall patterns changed. Grasslands grew in places where forests had once stood. Lakes appeared and vanished. Deserts expanded, then sometimes contracted again. A route that supported human movement for generations could become difficult. A dry region could briefly become greener. A river could change course. The landscape is not simply where history happens. It helps decide what becomes possible. You follow several adults away from camp. The familiar path toward water looks different today. The soil is harder. The vegetation near the stream seems thinner. When you arrive, the water level is lower than before. Not dangerously low, not yet, but noticeable. People notice immediately. One person kneels and touches the mud. Another walks along the edge, searching upstream. You begin to understand how environmental change first enters human experience, not as a graph, not as a line on a climate reconstruction, as less water, as animals arriving later, as roots becoming harder to find, as a familiar plant failing to appear where it should. Climate is experienced locally, slowly, sometimes unevenly. A colder century does not mean every day feels cold. A drier phase does not mean rain stops forever. Instead, probabilities shift. Some seasons fail more often. Certain places become less dependable. People adapt long before they know they are living through a climatic transition. You move farther from the water. The group searches for signs of animals. Tracks are present, but fewer than you remember. Perhaps the herd has moved. Perhaps this is temporary. Perhaps the group expected exactly this. You cannot tell. One hunter points toward higher ground, another responds with a long explanation. Plans are changing. That is the essential response. Movement. Hunter-gatherers can adapt to fluctuating environments partly because they are mobile. If resources become scarce in one place, a community may shift camp. if animals change their route. Hunters follow if a plant becomes abundant elsewhere. Gathering patterns change. Mobility is not aimless wandering, it is flexibility. The ability to leave can be a survival advantage. You climb toward a ridge. Wind moves across the open ground. The air smells dry. Below you, the valley stretches into the distance. Parts of it are green, others are dusty and pale. One person points far beyond the area you have travelled so far. Perhaps another water source lies there. Perhaps a seasonal camp. Perhaps relatives. You think back to the neighbouring group. Social relationships matter even more when environments become unpredictable. If one region suffers and another remains productive, knowledge of people elsewhere can provide options. A person does not survive climate variability only by understanding plants and animals. They may also survive because somebody beyond the ridge knows their name. The group turns toward a different route. You descend into rougher terrain. The change is immediate. Vegetation thickens in a narrow depression. Moisture remains trapped longer here. Several edible plants still grow. People begin collecting. The solution is not technological in the dramatic sense. No new tool is invented. No monument is built. The group simply knows another place. That knowledge is enough. You kneel beside a patch of roots. The soil is firmer than earlier in the season. Digging takes more effort. A person beside you changes technique. Loosening the ground from the side, you imitate the motion better. Again, adaptation appears as adjustment rather than revolution. Small changes, different route, different timing, different food, different camp. These may seem modest from the future, but repeated flexibility is powerful. Human populations eventually spread through environments ranging from tropical coastlines to cold steppe, mountains, forests, and deserts. That did not happen because people were biologically suited to everything. They carried behavioral flexibility with them: fire, clothing, shelter, tools, social cooperation, memory, the ability to change plans. Culture allows humans to respond faster than genetic evolution alone. The afternoon grows warmer. Clouds begin appearing in the distance. One person notices immediately. Several others look. The clouds are tall and dark at the base. You have learned not to dismiss these glances. The group begins returning earlier than expected. The pace increases slightly. No panic, just calculation. You cross open ground as wind picks up. Dry leaves skitter across the soil. The temperature falls. Then rain arrives. Large drops at first. Scattered. Cold against your skin. People pull coverings around themselves. The group moves toward a shallow overhang. Within minutes, the rain becomes heavier. You squeeze beneath stone with everyone else. Water darkens the ground outside. The smell of wet earth rises strongly. Dust disappears. Nearby vegetation bends under the rainfall. Children watch from the edge of the shelter. One reaches a hand into the water and is pulled back before becoming completely soaked. You listen. Rain striking stone. Wind. Muted conversation. The storm is brief. Perhaps half an hour. Perhaps less. Then sunlight begins returning through broken cloud. The entire landscape smells different. Fresh. Cool. Alive. Water collects in shallow depressions. For the group, this is useful. But a single storm does not erase a dry season. You can see that in their reactions. No one behaves as though the problem is solved. People notice where water runs, where it gathers, which channels fill. Such observations may matter later. Rainfall leaves information. The journey back continues. You think about regions far beyond this valley, at different points during the late Pleistocene. Parts of the Sahara experienced wetter conditions than today, creating lakes, rivers, and grasslands across areas now dominated by desert. At other times, aridity intensified. Those alternating conditions could open and close pathways for humans and animals. A landscape that seems like a permanent barrier on a modern map may once have been crossable. and a route that looked promising for centuries might later disappear under harsher conditions. This complicates every simple migration story. You cannot draw one arrow out of Africa and assume people followed it once. Movements likely responded to changing windows of opportunity. Coastlines, rainfall, vegetation, fresh water, population pressure, social connections. Many pathways may have been attempted. Some led to lasting populations, others ended. The evidence preserved today captures only part of that movement. You reach the shelter near sunset. The earlier rain has arrived here too. The ground is damp. Water drips from the edge of the rock. People immediately begin checking bedding and fuel. Dry firewood has become valuable. Someone moves stored material farther under cover. Another person protects a bundle of plant fibers. A damp night requires different preparation. The fire is coaxed higher. Smoke thickens. Your eyes sting slightly. You shift position. Climate change, you realize, can become personal very quickly when your entire heating system consists of burning wood that must first remain dry. The camp settles. Conversation turns toward tomorrow. You cannot understand the words, but gestures indicate direction. Perhaps the group will move soon. The lower water source may not remain reliable. Perhaps another camp lies ahead. Maybe the neighboring community already knows more about conditions beyond the ridge. The possibility of relocation does not seem catastrophic. This shelter feels like home to you now, for the people here. Home may not mean one permanent structure. Home can move. It can be the group, the fire, the familiar tools, the stories, the children, the remembered route toward the next reliable place. That idea changes how you think about stability. Modern life often equates stability with staying put, a fixed address, a building, a field, a boundary. Here, stability may come from knowing how to leave. The fire settles into a steady glow. Outside, water continues dripping. The temperature drops again. You pull the hide closer around your shoulders. Somewhere beyond the shelter, animals are adjusting too. Plants are responding. Streams are filling and shrinking. Grasslands are shifting. Entire human populations are making countless tiny decisions inside these larger changes. Move, wait, return, gather something else, follow a different herd, visit another group, try another valley. No one here knows the phrase climate adaptation. They simply practice it. And as darkness covers the wet ground outside, you begin to see why humans survived so many unstable landscapes. Not because they controlled the environment, because they learned how rarely it stayed the same. The camp begins changing before you fully understand what is happening. At first, it looks like ordinary preparation. A hide is folded, a bundle of tools is tied, several containers are checked, children are called closer, then bedding is lifted. Useful pieces of wood are gathered. Someone carries away a collection of stone that had been resting near the shelter wall. The meaning becomes clear. The group is leaving, not abandoning the place in panic, not fleeing danger, simply moving. Yesterday's lower water level has become part of the decision. So has the changing season. So has knowledge of other places beyond the valley. You look around the shelter for several days. This has been your home. You know the shape of the stone above the fire, you know where smoke catches beneath the overhang. You know the path toward water. The idea of walking away feels strangely personal for everyone else. Departure is part of life. Mobility does not mean people lack attachment to place. It means attachment can include many places. A dry season water source, a sheltered winter camp, a valley where certain plants ripen, a river crossing, a rocky outcrop where good stone can be found, a meeting place where neighbouring groups gather. People can know several landscapes intimately and return to them repeatedly. The group finishes packing. Nothing resembling modern luggage appears. Items are carried with straps, hides, baskets, bundles, hands, and shoulders. Infants must travel too. Older children walk. Useful possessions are limited partly because every possession has weight. That fact shapes material culture. Owning an object is convenient. Carrying it for days is less so. You lift a bundle, immediately, you develop a new respect for minimalism. The group begins walking. The rock shelter slowly recedes behind you. No farewell ceremony occurs. Perhaps everyone expects to return. Perhaps another group will use it first. Perhaps weather will alter the place before anyone comes back. You follow the trail toward higher ground. The route is familiar at first. Then it continues past the ridge where you previously turned back. The world opens. Ahead lies territory you have never seen for the people beside you. It may be perfectly ordinary. This is how enormous human expansions can begin, not with explorers announcing a destination, with families walking into the next known valley, then perhaps the valley beyond that. Movement across generations can cover astonishing distances even when each individual travels within a relatively local world. By 60,000 years ago, Homo sapiens were already present beyond Africa, and in the millennia that followed, human populations would spread across southern and eastern Asia, eventually reaching lands separated by substantial stretches of water. The routes were not one straight migration highway. Populations expanded, contracted, mixed, separated, and sometimes disappeared. You experience none of that as a grand historical pattern. You experience sore feet. The ground becomes rocky. A child complains. An adult adjusts the load and takes something from the child. The group continues. That is what migration looks like from inside it. Walking, stopping, carrying, waiting for slower people, checking water, choosing where to sleep. The dramatic arrows you have seen on maps contain a remarkable amount of ordinary inconvenience. By midday, you reach a broad river. The water is deeper than the stream near the old camp. Everyone pauses. Several people inspect the bank. Crossing points matter. A river can be resource, route, landmark, and barrier at the same time. This one cannot simply be ignored. People walk along the edge until a shallower section appears. The current remains strong. Loads are adjusted. Children are carried or closely guided. You step into the water. Cold immediately surrounds your legs. The stones beneath your feet are slippery. You move slowly. Someone ahead reaches back and steadies another person. Nobody treats the crossing casually. A fall could soak clothing, damage tools, lose food, or cause injury. You reach the other side with considerably less dignity than the rest of the group. No one applauds. Reasonable. The journey resumes. You think about much larger water crossings. By later phases of the Pleistocene, humans reach Sahul, the combined Ice Age landmass of Australia and New Guinea, which still required crossing open water even when sea levels were lower. That simple fact tells you something extraordinary. Some prehistoric humans were capable of planned or repeated water travel. The vessels have vanished. No 60,000-year-old boat is waiting conveniently in a museum to explain the journey. But people reached land that could not be accessed by walking alone, whatever they used. Raft, simple watercraft, or technology unlike anything preserved. It worked. The missing boat is a perfect example of how survival can leave only an outcome. People arrived, the equipment disappeared. You imagine the first group facing open water. A distant shoreline may have been visible in some crossings. In others, perhaps not. Did they leave intentionally? Were crossings made repeatedly? How many people travelled together? How much food and water could be carried? The surviving archaeological and genetic traces narrow some possibilities, but they do not reconstruct the voyage in comfortable detail. You are left with islands, sea levels, dates, and human presence on the other side. Sometimes history gives you the destination but removes the journey. Your own route remains firmly terrestrial by afternoon. The group reaches a broad, open plain. Animals move in the distance. Several hunters stop and watch. No hunt begins. Travel is already consuming energy. The group keeps moving. A cluster of trees appears ahead. Relief passes through everyone. Shade. possibly water. The children accelerate slightly. You would too if your bundle were lighter. Beneath the trees, signs of previous human use appear. Old ash, broken stone, a hearth depression. Perhaps this is a known stopping place. The group puts loads down. Your shoulders celebrate privately. Nobody builds a permanent structure instead. People begin arranging the temporary camp. Fuel is collected. A fire is started. A few hides create sleeping surfaces. Water is located nearby. Within an hour, an unfamiliar place begins to look inhabited. That transformation fascinates you. Home is portable because skills are portable. People know how to rebuild familiar routines in new ground. Fire goes near shelter. Tools are organized. Children settle. Food appears. A temporary camp becomes socially recognizable. The landscape changes because humans have stopped inside it. You remain here only for the night. At dawn, movement begins again. The next several days blend together. Walking, resting, gathering along the route, sleeping near fire, crossing uneven country. The environment changes gradually. Vegetation shifts. Certain plants disappear. New ones appear. People notice immediately. You begin seeing unfamiliar animals too. One morning, a group of birds rises from a marshy area in great numbers. The sound fills the sky. Children look upward. Adults glance only briefly. They have probably seen this before. A route that feels exploratory to you may be inherited knowledge to them. Someone knows where the next water lies. Someone knows how many days remain before another familiar location. Someone may have travelled this route since childhood. That distinction matters. Migration in the deep past does not always mean entering totally unknown territory. Social networks and previous journeys can extend knowledge ahead of movement. A person joining from another group may know routes your current group has never travelled. Visitors can bring descriptions. Hunters range ahead. Seasonal movement creates memory. New territory often begins as somebody else's familiar territory. One evening, the group reaches higher ground. You can see far across the landscape. Smoke rises faintly in the distance. Again, another group. This time, nobody moves toward it. Perhaps they are unknown. Perhaps the route requires continuing elsewhere. The smoke simply becomes information. Human presence is scattered through the landscape like small points of light. Some will connect, others never will. You imagine these populations spreading over centuries. A camp separates into two. One branch remains near familiar water. Another follows animals farther east. Children born there know a new territory as home. Their children move farther. No individual needs to understand that a continental migration is underway. The movement becomes visible only from thousands of years away, near the fire that night. You think about those future maps again, lines sweeping elegantly across continents. They make expansion look quick, clean, purposeful. Here, nothing is clean. A route closes because water fails. A child becomes ill. A river floods. A group turns back. Another joins relatives. A storm delays movement. People wait for food to ripen. Years pass. Generations pass. Some pathways succeed. Others vanish completely. The true map would contain thousands of hesitations. You lie beneath a hide and look toward the dark horizon. Tomorrow, the group will walk again, perhaps only 10 kilometers, perhaps less. It does not seem like much, but repeated enough times, across enough generations, these short journeys will carry human beings farther than anyone beside this fire can imagine. Across deserts, through forests, along coasts, over mountain passes, and eventually, across water, you close your eyes. The fire crackles beside you. Footsteps have stopped for the night, but the larger movement continues, not as a march, as countless ordinary families carrying their world from one camp to the next. You wake before sunrise to the sound of someone breathing unevenly. At first, you cannot tell where it is coming from. The camp is still dark. The fire has collapsed into a low bed of embers. Most people remain under hides or curled close to one another. Then you notice an older adult lying near the shelter wall. Someone is beside them. Another person arrives carrying water. The atmosphere is quiet. No panic, no dramatic rush, just care. You move closer. The older person is awake, but weak. Perhaps fever, perhaps exhaustion, perhaps pain from an injury that happened days ago. You cannot diagnose anything from where you sit. That uncertainty is part of this world. There are no written medical records, no thermometer, no laboratory, no pharmacy. Yet illness is not unfamiliar. People know what weakness looks like. They know when someone cannot walk. They know when a wound is worsening. They know when food must be brought closer. They know when a child needs to be kept warm. Care begins long before medicine becomes a profession. Someone dampens a piece of material and presses it against the older person's skin. Another brings us a small portion of food. A third adjusts the bedding. The actions are simple, but they cost time. That matters. In a mobile community, anyone who cannot travel easily creates a practical problem. The group must slow down, wait, carry extra weight, share food with someone who cannot gather or hunt. And yet prehistoric skeletal remains sometimes show individuals surviving severe injuries or chronic conditions for long periods. Survival of that kind is difficult to explain without help from others. A healed fracture is not merely a medical clue, it can be evidence of patience. You think of the journeys you have made over the past few days, rivers, rocky ground, long distances, heavy bundles. Someone unable to walk would need assistance. Perhaps a temporary camp would last longer. Perhaps others would carry equipment. Perhaps food would be brought back. Social care has consequences you can see in movement. The group does not leave today. That decision seems connected to the older person. People still disperse for gathering and small tasks. Hunters check the surrounding area. Children remain active, but the camp stays where it is. You sit near the fire and begin noticing how many small forms of support pass between people. A young child receives food from someone who does not appear to be their mother. An older child carries water for an adult working with tools. A hunter returns and gives part of what was collected to someone who stayed behind. Nobody announces these actions. They happen because life depends on them. Human beings are expensive creatures to maintain. Children remain dependent for years. Injuries happen. Illness happens. Pregnancy and childbirth demand energy. Older people may contribute knowledge even when they cannot travel as quickly. A group that shares work and food can absorb these differences better than isolated individuals. You watch the older person sip water. They seem more alert now. Someone speaks to them. The response is faint, but another adult smiles. You do not know whether the illness is serious. Maybe it will pass in a day, maybe not. Prehistoric sickness rarely leaves clear traces unless it affects bone or teeth. Most infections disappear from the record entirely. A person might suffer fever, stomach illness, respiratory infection, parasites, or soft tissue injury and leave no skeletal sign at all. That makes ancient health look cleaner than it really was. Bone preserves only some kinds of suffering. You look around camp. Nobody here has perfect teeth. Wear begins early. Food contains grit. Stone grinding can introduce fine particles. Hard materials damage enamel over time. Small chips and heavy wear may become normal, yet dental disease varies with diet. And the widespread cavities associated with later agricultural societies are not necessarily dominant everywhere here. There is no refined sugar, a fact your dentist from the future might appreciate. Still, prehistoric mouths have their own problems. Someone nearby uses a thin stick between teeth. The gesture catches your attention because it feels unexpectedly familiar. Grooves found on ancient teeth have sometimes been linked to repeated use of toothpicks or similar objects. A tiny habit can survive indirectly in enamel. The stick itself disappears. The wear remains. You begin to wonder how many ordinary acts archaeology reconstructs backward like this, not because the object survives, because the body remembers it, later in the morning. You follow a small gathering party. The pace is slow. No one goes far. One adult collects leaves from a plant you have seen before but never watched closely. Some are placed in a bundle separate from food. You notice that distinction. Useful does not always mean edible. Plants can serve as fibers, fuel, insect repellents, pigments, bedding, adhesives, or treatments. Whether the leaves in this bundle are intended for medicine is impossible for you to know. The temptation to label every unusual plant as a remedy is strong. But people gather materials for many reasons. What you can say is that long familiarity with local ecology creates opportunities for experimentation. A bitter bark may reduce discomfort, a leaf may soothe skin. Smoke from one plant may repel insects better than another. Knowledge can grow from repeated observation without anyone understanding the chemistry. You return to camp. The leaves are crushed, mixed with something. Then part of the material is placed near the older person. Perhaps treatment, perhaps simply comfort. The purpose remains unclear. That lack of certainty feels appropriate. You are watching practical knowledge before written pharmacology, not magic versus medicine, not science versus superstition, just people testing what seems to help and passing those habits forward. Some practices may work, some may do nothing, some could be harmful. Human beings in every age have managed all three. By midday, heat settles over the camp. The older person sleeps. Children are told to stay farther from them. You wonder whether people here understand contagion in any recognizable form. They do not know microbes, but repeated experience can reveal patterns. A sickness may spread after close contact. Certain water may make people ill. Rotten food causes problems. Smoke can worsen breathing. No germ theory is required to notice associations. Whether those associations become reliable rules varies from place to place. You hear coughing from the shelter wall. Someone brings the sick person upright. Another supports their back. Again. The response is collective. Care is labor. You start to appreciate its hidden cost. Every hour spent tending someone is an hour not spent gathering. Every portion of food shared with an injured person is food earned by someone else. If cooperation had no value, such behavior would be difficult to sustain, but care can be reciprocal. Today you're injured. Next season I may be. A skilled older person may still know roots, plants, tool-making, stories, or kin connections valuable to everyone. A child cared for now becomes an adult contributor later. Social support is not merely kindness, it is part of survival strategy. That does not make it less compassionate, if anything. It shows how deeply compassion and practicality can overlap in the afternoon. One of the hunters returns with a cut along the forearm, not severe. Still, the group reacts immediately. The wound is cleaned. Something is wrapped around it. The hunter looks irritated, more than frightened. You recognize that expression. A minor injury is inconvenient in any century. The wrapping interests you. Hide, fiber, perhaps plant material against the skin. Soft tissue treatment almost never survives directly. So ancient first aid has to be inferred from context, rare preserved materials, and the simple necessity of managing wounds. A cut left dirty can become dangerous. People who repeatedly survive outdoor injuries would notice that some responses work better than others. The hunter flexes the hand. The wrap is adjusted. Then they sit down and start repairing a tool. Life resumes. There is no separate medical tent, no specialist wearing a recognizable uniform. Some individuals may know more than others about care. Perhaps certain people become trusted because experience accumulates around them. But healing remains embedded in ordinary camp life. You think of childbirth. You have not witnessed one here. But every person around you exists because someone did. Pregnancy changes mobility and energy needs. Birth can be dangerous. Newborns require constant attention. Human infants are exceptionally dependent. A mother carrying an infant cannot do everything alone. Other adults and older children can help with food, protection, carrying, and supervision. That cooperative pattern may have shaped human social evolution deeply. Again, The evidence does not hand you one universal prehistoric family structure, but the basic problem is visible. Babies need people, many people. Evening arrives. The older person is awake again. This time they eat more. Several people notice. Nobody cheers. But the mood around them loosens slightly. A child approaches and sits nearby. The older person touches the child's head. The gesture lasts only a moment. You feel its weight anyway. Tomorrow, perhaps the group will move. Perhaps they will wait another day. The decision will depend partly on this one person's strength. That tells you something about prehistoric mobility you had not considered before. Routes are shaped by bodies. A map may show water, stone, animals, and distance. But real movement also depends on who is sick, who is pregnant, who is injured, who is very young, who can carry what. Human geography is biological and social at the same time. The fire grows brighter. The injured hunter checks the bandage. The older person drinks again. Children settle under hides. The camp becomes quiet. You think about all the ancient skeletons displayed behind glass in your own time. They can look solitary. One individual, one set of bones, one label, but a healed injury hints at other hands. Someone brought water, someone shared food, someone waited, someone carried. Someone stayed nearby through the night. Those people leave no mark on the injured bone, yet without them. The bone might tell a very different story. You lie down close to the fire. The air cools. A soft conversation continues beside the older person, and tonight. Survival feels less like strength. It feels like not being left alone when strength fails. By now, you know the shape of this world well enough to notice what is missing, not from the camp, from your understanding. You have seen tools, fire, food gathering, hunting, clothing, children learning, pigment, ornaments, movement across country, meetings with other groups, care for the sick. You have watched daily life become more familiar, and yet the closer you come to these people, the more you realize how much of them will never reach the future. Morning light enters the shelter slowly. Someone is repairing a binding around a wooden shaft. A child is eating near the fire. Two adults speak quietly while sorting gathered food. An older person, stronger than yesterday, sits upright beneath a hide. Everything looks ordinary. That is precisely the problem. Ordinary life is difficult to preserve. Archaeology works best with durable things. Stone, bone, teeth, shell, charcoal, sediment, sometimes pigment, sometimes tiny plant remains. But most of what makes a human life recognizable is made from materials and moments that disappear. You look at the person repairing the shaft. The wooden tool may rot, the binding may rot, the adhesive may vanish, the hands will vanish. The conversation occurring during the repair will leave nothing at all. Perhaps someone is telling a joke. Perhaps they are discussing tomorrow's route. Perhaps they are arguing quietly about who forgot to collect fuel. You will never know. A future excavation might recover one stone point from this exact place. From that point, experts may reconstruct raw material source, manufacturing technique, use wear, breakage, and perhaps traces of hafting. That is an extraordinary achievement, but the point cannot tell them whether its owner was patient, funny, jealous, generous, irritating, loved, afraid of storms, good with children, terrible at singing. The difference between material evidence and lived experience suddenly feels enormous. You step outside. The air is cool. Wind moves lightly across the vegetation. Someone calls to a child. The child responds. Their names are unknown to you. That thought hits harder than expected. Every person in this camp has a name. Almost certainly. Names organize relationships. They allow people to call across distance, to remember the dead, to distinguish one child from another, to tell stories about absent relatives, and yet every name here will probably disappear. Not because the people were unimportant. Because sound does not fossilize, you walk with several people toward the nearby water source. The route is familiar now. You know where the ground slopes. You recognize the tree with the twisted trunk. You remember where animal tracks appeared earlier. The landscape has become full of associations. That must be true for the people around you on a far deeper level. Places carry memory. A certain bend in the stream may be where someone was injured. A ridge may mark a meeting with another group. A tree may grow near a buried relative. A particular shelter could be remembered because a child was born there. None of those associations need alter the physical landscape. Future researchers may sap the location perfectly and still miss its meaning entirely. You kneel near the water. Sunlight flickers across the surface. One person begins collecting something from the bank. Another inspects tracks. The scene could be reconstructed from environmental evidence, species, climate, sediment, water availability, perhaps even season. But emotional geography is invisible. You cannot excavate nostalgia. You return toward camp. On the way, you notice scratches on a piece of stone. They could be accidental or deliberate. That ambiguity follows you everywhere now. Human beings make marks for many reasons. Some marks are decorative, some functional, some meaningless. Some become symbols. A future archaeologist has to decide which possibilities deserve weight. Evidence does not always cooperate. One carved line can produce 10 interpretations. Another object can sit unnoticed for decades until a new technique reveals traces nobody could previously detect. Deep prehistory keeps changing because methods improve. Microscopic wear, residue analysis, ancient proteins, stable isotopes, sedimentary DNA, improved dating. Each technique can extract new information from material that once seemed silent. A tiny fragment may suddenly reveal diet, movement, ancestry, tool use, environmental conditions. The past does not change. The questions you can ask of it do. That is one reason the era you are visiting remains hidden rather than simply unknown. It is not empty. It is partially recoverable. Pieces continue appearing, but every recovery also exposes another layer of absence. You return to the shelter. Someone has placed red pigment beside the fire. A child touches it and draws a short line on stone. An adult says something. The child wipes part of the mark away. You smile. Perhaps you just witnessed discipline, perhaps instruction. Perhaps the child used material that was not supposed to be wasted. Whatever happened. The social meaning disappears almost instantly unless someone remembers it. The red trace might remain longer than the reason. That imbalance is almost poetic. Later, you sit beside an adult working hide. The scraper moves steadily. You remember watching similar work days ago. Now you understand how many stages of production may vanish. The hide itself, the stitching, the cord, the finished garment. Maybe only the stone scraper survives. A future reconstruction might show a person wearing a crude wrap because that seems safest to imagine. The real clothing could have been more fitted, more decorated, more regionally distinctive. Perhaps fashion existed in ways you would recognize immediately. You have already seen ornaments. Why would preference stop there? People may choose certain colors, shapes, hair arrangements, body markings, decorative patterns, personal styles. None of this requires cities. Fashion begins whenever appearance becomes social. A child walks past wearing a small ornament. You wonder if they chose it. Perhaps it marks family. Perhaps age. Perhaps they begged for it because another child had one. That last explanation will never appear in a scientific paper, but it feels wonderfully human. The afternoon becomes warmer. Several adults sit in shade. Conversation grows lively for a while. One person gestures dramatically, others laugh. You cannot understand why. Humor is one of the greatest missing archives. Jokes depend on language, timing, shared assumptions, embarrassment, exaggeration, memory. Almost nothing survives. A society can laugh every day for thousands of years and leave no direct archaeological evidence that anyone was funny. You watch the group laugh again, then the moment passes. That is all. You begin imagining everything else that disappears. Dreams, nicknames, arguments, promises, courtship, private fears, songs sung badly, stories children ask to hear repeatedly, grudges, favourite foods, the feeling of missing someone who moved to another camp. Which child was impatient? Which hunter hated cold mornings? Who told the best stories? Who never remembered where they left tools? A civilization is not required for any of these things. They belong to people, and people are already here. That realization changes how you look at archaeological silence. Silence is not evidence of simplicity. Sometimes it is evidence of poor preservation. A site with only stone flakes can represent a day filled with conversation, textile work, woodcraft, cooking, games, songs, teaching, flirting, disagreement, and boredom. The durable objects are not the whole culture. They are survivors from it. Even population size can be difficult to estimate precisely. Genetic models suggest periods when ancestral human populations may have been relatively small. But translating genetic diversity into exact numbers of people living across particular landscapes is complicated. Archaeological visibility varies from region to region. Some environments preserve sites well, others destroy or bury them. Coastlines disappear beneath rising seas. Tropical conditions can consume organic material rapidly. Large regions remain poorly surveyed. The map of known sites is partly a map of where evidence survived and where researchers have looked. Absence on a map can mean nobody lived there, or that nobody has found them yet, or that the ground containing their lives is now beneath the water. You look toward the horizon. How many camps like this exist tonight? Hundreds, thousands more. Each with its own relationships, accents, roots, habits, perhaps styles of tools slightly different from those here. Most will leave only fragments. Some may vanish completely. That thought would feel tragic if the people around you seemed concerned with being remembered. They do not. Why would they? They are busy living. The fire needs fuel. Food needs preparing. A child has dropped something. Someone is checking a tool. Another person is examining the sky. History is a concern of the future. Life belongs to the present. Evening settles over the camp. You sit beside the older person who was ill yesterday. They seem better. A child brings them something. The older person says a few words. The child laughs. There it is again. A moment with no archaeological future. You watch it anyway. The fire grows brighter as darkness gathers. Stone tools lie nearby. Those may survive. A patch of ash may survive. Perhaps the red pigment will remain. Maybe a tooth. Maybe a shell. A few fragments separated by centimetres of sediment. Future hands may recover them carefully. Numbers will be assigned, layers measured, dates estimated, interpretations written. All useful, all necessary, and still incomplete. You lean back against the stone. The camp becomes quieter. Voices soften. A child falls asleep. Someone pulls a hide over them. You realise that after everything you have learned, one of the most accurate things you can say about 60,000 years ago is also the simplest. Most of it is gone. Not because little happened, because almost everything happened in forms that time was never designed to keep. The final morning begins without ceremony. No one knows it is your last day here. The fire is revived. Children wake. A hide is shaken free of dust. Someone checks the sky. Someone else checks the path toward water. Food is divided. Tools are gathered. Everything continues as it has for generations. You sit near the edge of camp and watch. After everything you have seen, the scene feels almost ordinary now. That may be the strangest change of all. When you first entered this world, life without farming or cities seemed incomplete. You expected deprivation, temporary existence, human beings waiting for the real beginning of history. Now that idea feels difficult to defend. The people around you are not waiting for civilization. They already have a world. It is simply built from different things. Memory rather than writing, paths rather than roads, knowledge rather than maps, relationships rather than institutions, firelight rather than electric light. The comparison is not meant to make prehistoric life sound easy. It is not. A failed season can matter terribly. Injury can become dangerous. Cold can kill. Water can disappear. Food can fail. Children require constant care. Distance is measured with feet. The environment offers no guarantee of comfort. Yet hardship does not make a life unfinished. You understand that now. A person near the fire begins working stone. You know the sequence. Select, turn, strike, inspect. Another person checks a wooden shaft. A child imitates the movement nearby. Yesterday you might have called this technology. Today it simply looks like morning work. That shift matters. You've stopped seeing everything here as evidence. You're beginning to see it as life. The people themselves would not think in terms of the late Pleistocene. They do not know they lived 60,000 years before your time. They do not divide themselves into archaeological periods. Nobody has informed them that future textbooks will place them somewhere near the middle of a human migration diagram. They are concerned with more immediate matters. Is there enough water? Where are the animals? Will the weather change? Is a child healthy who will travel today? Which tool needs repairing? When will the neighbouring group return? History looks enormous from the future, from inside it. History feels like today. You follow several people toward higher ground. The route is familiar. Your feet know where the soil becomes loose. You recognise the trees near the water. You remember where you first struggled to identify tracks. That feels like a long time ago now, near the ridge. The group pauses. The landscape opens beneath you. Morning light spreads across valleys and patches of woodland. Smoke rises faintly from somewhere far away. Another camp. You no longer find that surprising. Human communities are scattered across this wider world. Some are Homo sapiens, farther across Eurasia. Neanderthals still maintain their own lives. Elsewhere, Denisovan populations and perhaps other groups contribute to a human story far more tangled than future generations once imagined. Some of those populations will meet. Some will exchange genes. Some will disappear as distinct groups. Their traces will remain inside later people. The human family tree you know from school becomes less like a tree the closer researchers look at ancient DNA. Branches separate, reconnect, and leave fragments inside one another. That discovery has transformed how the deep past is understood. A few decades of genetic research have recovered relationships that stone alone could never reveal. And yet genetics has its own silence. It can tell you that populations mixed. It cannot preserve the conversation before two people decided to stay together. You look toward the distant smoke. That distinction feels important now. Science can rebuild patterns. It rarely restores moments. The group continues near a shallow depression. Someone finds tracks. Several people crouch. You do too. This time, you recognize the animal family without help, not the exact species. You're not suddenly an expert, but you know the prints are fresh. The edges remain sharp. The soil has not yet dried inside them. One hunter glances toward you. For once, your interpretation appears acceptable. You feel absurdly pleased. 60,000 years of temporal displacement. And your greatest achievement is noticing that an animal walked through mud recently. It could be worse. The group follows the tracks only briefly. Today, there will be no major hunt. They turn toward a gathering area instead. Roots are collected, seeds inspected. A small patch of useful vegetation is remembered for later. Nothing remarkable happens. That is precisely why you pay attention. For most people living in this age, most days probably resemble this more than extraordinary events. Human survival is accumulated through ordinary decisions: where to stop, what to carry, who needs help, which food is worth collecting, when to leave, when to wait. The dramatic moments matter, but routine is what keeps a population alive between them. You return to camp around midday. The older person who was ill several days ago is walking slowly near the shelter. They are not fully strong. Still, they are upright. Someone gives them a task that can be done while sitting. The arrangement looks natural. Care has shifted into participation. You remember wondering whether the group would delay movement for this person. Now you see something more complicated. People are not divided neatly into useful and useless. Abilities change. Tasks change with them. An experienced person who cannot travel far may still repair tools, process food, watch children, remember routes, or teach. Age is not merely physical decline. It can also mean accumulated knowledge. The presence of older adults in prehistoric populations has attracted attention because longer lifespans can change how culture is transmitted. A person who survives to know grandchildren can connect generations, techniques, stories, landscape memories, and social relationships can travel farther through time. Exactly how common such multi-generational structures were at different points in prehistory is difficult to pin down from skeletal evidence alone, but their potential importance is considerable. You watch the older person correct a child handling a tool. There is the entire idea in one gesture, time teaching youth. The afternoon passes quietly. Ochre appears again. A shell ornament is adjusted, a hide is repaired, food is warmed. Someone laughs at something you cannot understand. You realize you've begun recognizing individuals by behavior even without names. The patient toolmaker, the child who becomes distracted by insects, the person who notices weather before everyone else, the adult who laughs loudly, the older person recovering from illness. None of these identities will survive archaeologically, yet they feel real to you. That may be the greatest correction this journey has given you. Prehistory often appears faceless because the evidence is faceless. That does not mean the people they had preferences, habits, tempers, affections, private memories, people they missed, people they avoided, children they worried about, perhaps songs they loved hearing and songs they wish someone would stop repeating. Human individuality did not begin with written biography. Even the word prehistoric can become misleading if heard too literally. It means before written history. It does not mean before human experience. Evening begins approaching. You walk once more to the edge of camp. The sun is lowering. The light becomes warmer. Smoke from the fire drifts sideways. A child runs past carrying a stick. Someone calls them back. The response is immediate and slightly reluctant. You smile. You have seen enough to know the rhythm now. Soon food will be shared. Tools will be placed closer to the shelter. The fire will become brighter as the surrounding landscape darkens. Voices will continue after daylight disappears. Someone may tell a story. Someone may fall asleep before it ends. Tomorrow, people will rise again. Perhaps they will remain here. Perhaps conditions will push them onward. A neighbouring group may visit. Hunters may return empty-handed. Gatherers may find more than expected. A child may finally shape a good stoneflake. Nothing will pause because you are leaving. You look across the landscape one last time. 60,000 years separates this camp from your own world. Agriculture has not begun. No city exists. No king rules here. No written law. No monument. No archive. And still, nearly everything that makes human history recognizable is already present in some form. Cooperation, conflict, teaching, travel. Technology, care, exchange, adornment, memory, curiosity, adaptation, love, almost certainly grief, inevitably, humour. Judging by the amount of laughter you've heard, the hidden era was never hidden to the people living inside it. It became hidden because time removed almost all of their voices. Stone remained, ash remained, genes remained, fragments remained. And from those fragments, your own age slowly began reconstructing the enormous human world that came before civilization. You return toward the fire, the group makes room, you sit among them one final time. No one marks the moment. That feels appropriate. History rarely announces when something is about to become ancient. It simply continues until enough time passes. The fire crackles. Red light moves across the shelter wall. Someone places food into your hands. You accept it. And for a little while longer, you remain among people who do not know they belong to a lost age. They are simply alive. The light outside becomes softer now. You no longer need to follow the tracks. You no longer need to remember which route is edible, where the next water source lies, or how to keep a stone point attached to its shaft. Those responsibilities belong to the people around the fire. You can simply watch. Night spreads slowly across the valley. The last birds settle. Wind moves through the grass with the same quiet sound you heard when you first arrived. Someone draws a hide around a sleeping child. Another person nudges a piece of wood deeper into the embers. The flame rises once, then lowers again. Nothing asks for your attention. There is no mystery that must be solved tonight. No final answer hidden beneath the stone. Some questions about this age may become clearer as new sites are found. New DNA is recovered, and new methods reveal details once invisible. Others may remain unanswered forever. That is all right. You do not need every missing name to know that names were spoken here. You do not need every vanished song to know that voices filled these nights. You do not need the complete story of every person to recognize their humanity. The fire grows quieter. Beyond it, the land fades into darkness. 60,000 years begin slipping away again. The shelter becomes shadow. Faces become silhouettes. The red glow of the embers softens until even that seems distant, and you return to your own night carrying only a simple thought. Long before civilization recorded human life was already full. Let the valley grow quiet now. Let the footsteps disappear. Let the last warmth of the ancient fire fade gently into the dark. The people remain where they belong, beneath their enormous sky. While you drift farther from the camp and closer to sleep, sweet dreams,